welcome to our channel. Good evening and welcome to another quiet journey through time. Tonight we drift back to an age when winter wasn't merely a season but a test of human ingenuity, a months-long trial that shaped every stone laid, every beam raised, every wall built against the cold. When the medieval world turned gray with frost, survival became an act of architecture, from frostbitten villages to candle-lit halls. Stone and timber were not luxuries but necessities, crafted not for comfort but for endurance. Before we step into this hushed passage through winter's grip on medieval Europe, I invite you to settle in. If this journey speaks to your heart, gently tap that like button. It helps others find these quiet hours of history. Consider subscribing to Epic Boring History, so these late-night wanderings through forgotten times can always find you. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you are right now, what hour it is in your corner of the world, whether you're wrapped in midnight stillness or greeting the dawn. Now, perhaps, dim your lights, maybe let a soft fan hum in the background for that gentle white noise. Let your shoulders drop, your breathing slow, and prepare to drift back centuries, to a time when every human structure was a whispered argument with the cold. Tonight we'll walk through smoky cottages and stone chapels, through the daily rhythm of peasant life and the grand illusions of castle halls. We'll meet the builders who shaped warmth from raw earth and explore the mysteries buried in ancient walls. The journey is long, unhurried, designed to let you drift away whenever sleep calls. There's no urgency here, no peaks to climb, only the soft unfolding of how people lived, built and endured when winter ruled the world. So breathe deeply. Let the modern world fade. Let us begin. You wake before the sun, not by choice but by necessity. The darkness inside your timber cottage is thick and cold, broken only by the faint orange glow of embers dying in the hearth. Your breath clouds the air inside your own home. The smoke from last night's fire has settled like fog near the rafters, clinging to the blackened thatch above outside. Frost has painted the world silver, and still the fields beyond your door stretch flat and hard, the earth locked tight beneath a crust of ice. You lie for a moment on your straw-filled mattress, feeling the cold seep through the rough wool blanket. Your body aches from yesterday's work and the work before that and the endless rhythm of days that blur together in winter's grip. But the animals cannot wait. The cow in the lean-to beside your cottage will die if she goes too long without water, and the chickens need their feed scattered before dawn. You sit up slowly, your joints stiff. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, frozen hard as stone, covered with loose straw that prickles your soles. Your clothes never fully dried from yesterday, they hang near the hearth, damp and smoky. You pull them on anyway, layering wool over linen, over skin, creating what little insulation you can manage. The surrounding cottage is small, perhaps 15 feet across. Every timber beam, every wee and door wall, every carefully pitched angle of the roof exists for one purpose: to keep you alive through winter. The walls are woven from thin branches then plastered over with a mixture of clay, straw, dung and water dorm. This mixture dries hard in summer, but winter makes it weep with moisture, and small cracks appear where the cold sneaks through. You've patched those cracks many times. You'll patch them again before the season ends, pressing mud and straw into every gap with numb fingers. The roof above you is thatched with straw, layered, thick and steep. Its angle is deliberate. Snow must slide off before its weight crushes the beams, before it soaks through and rots the structure from above. Last year your neighbor's roof collapsed in a late March storm. They rebuilt it in the spring. But the memory of that night, the crack of timber, the shouts in darkness, lingers in the village like a warning. Your cottage has no chimney, not in the modern sense. Smoke from the central hearth rises up through the room, swirling past hanging herbs and dried fish, before escaping through a small hole cut beneath the ridgepole. The smoke blackens everything it touches. The rafters are glossy with years of soot, the walls sure dark, your lungs familiar with the constant low burn of inhaling wood smoke hour after hour. But the smoke serves a purpose beyond cooking. It preserves meat hung from the rafters, it drives insects from the thatch, and its heat, however uncomfortable, lingers near. The roof, creating a pocket of slightly warmer air above your sleeping space. The hearth itself is the heart of your home. It's simply a circle of stone set into the earth and floor containing fire, defining the center of daily life. There's no mantle, no decorative surround, just functional stone, soot, blackened and warm to the touch. You spend more time near those stones than anywhere else in winter, drawn to warmth, like a pilgrim to a shrine. This morning the fire is nearly dead. Only a few red embers glow beneath a layer of ash, and you know you'll need to coax them back to life. You kneel beside the hearth, your knees pressing into cold earth with careful breath. You blow gently on the embers, watching them brighten, then dim, then brighten again. You add a handful of dry straw, watching it catch and curl, then small twigs, then slightly larger sticks, building the fire in patient stages until flames dance. Once more. The warmth reaches your face. First, a small blessing. You hold your hands over the flames, feeling the ache in your fingers begin to ease. But you cannot linger. The cow is waiting, and daylight, what little there is in February, will not last long. You pull on your outer cloak, a heavy wool thing that your grandmother wore decades ago. It smells of smoke and damp animal and the particular mustiness of fabric that never fully dries. At the door you pause. The door itself is rough, hunted planks bound with iron hung on leather hinges. That creak with every movement, it fits poorly in its frame. Gaps show around the edges where wind whistles through. You've stuffed those gaps with rags and straw, but still the drafts persist. You lift the wooden latch and push the door open against the frost that sealed it partway shut overnight. Cold air rushes in like water through a broken dam, stealing the heat you've just built. Outside, the world is gray and white and utterly still. The village, a cluster of perhaps 20 cottages, huddles together in the shallow valley, surrounded by dormant fields. Smoke rises from most of the roofs, thin, pale columns climbing into the heavy sky. It's the only sign of life, beyond the occasional bark of a dog, the low of cattle stirring in their shelters. The layout of the village is no accident. Each cottage is built close to its neighbor, close enough that walls almost touch, creating wind breaks and shared warmth. In the deepest cold you can sometimes feel heat seeping through the door wall from the family next door. It's a small comfort, knowing you're not alone in the dark. You walk the short distance to the lepanto where your cow sleeps. The structure is even rudder than your cottage, 3 walls and a slanted roof, open on one side but positioned to block the north wind. The cow is a dark shape in the shadows, her breath steaming. She shifts when she sees you, her hooves crunching in frozen straw. There's a wooden bucket near the door and you pick it up. Ice has formed across the surface of the water overnight, a thin sheet you have to break with your fist. The ice cracks with a sound like breaking glass. You pull out the larger pieces and toss them aside, then dip a smaller bucket to carry water to the cow. She drinks slowly, her rough tongue lapping at the cold water. You stroke her flank absently, feeling the warmth of her body through your gloves. Animals are wealth in winter. A cow provides milk, thin in the cold months but still nourishment, and eventually meat, leather, bone for tools. Losing an animal to cold or hunger is a catastrophe that can unravel a family's survival. So you check on her twice a day, every day, no matter how tired you are. After the cow you scatter grain for the chickens, huddled in their small coop. They're less robust than the cow, and you've already lost 3 to the cold this season. The survivors peck at the frozen ground, their feathers puffed up for insulation. They give fewer eggs in winter, sometimes none for days, but they'll recover when spring returns. If spring returns. In the depths of February, spring feels like a myth, a story told by old people to comfort children. You return to your cottage, closing the door against the gray morning. Inside, the fire has grown stronger, and you set a pot of water over the flames to boil. Breakfast will be barley porridge, thick and plain. You measure out a handful of grain from the dwindling sack in the corner, adding it to the water along with a pinch of salt. salt is precious in winter. It preserves meat, flavors food, and you use it sparingly, making your small store last until the traveling merchants return in spring. While the porridge cooks, you sit on a low stool near the fire. Your wife is still asleep on the far side of the cottage, bundled under wool, with the children. They'll wake soon, drawn by the smell of food and the growing warmth. For now, you let them rest, let them escape winter a few moments longer. The porridge bubbles slowly thickening. You stir it with a wooden spoon, watching the grains swell and soften. There's a rhythm to winter days, a sameness that can feel either comforting or suffocating, depending on your mood. Wake, tend animals, eat, work, eat again, sleep, repeat. The work varies by day. Some days you repair tools in preparation for spring, planting, sharpening the plow blade, mending leather harnesses, carving new handles for broken implements. Other days you gather what fuel you can find. Firewood is precious, and you've spent autumn stockpiling every branch and log you could haul home. But even a good wood pile diminishes faster than you'd like. Each night's fire consumes what took hours to gather, and you watch the pile shrink with quiet anxiety. Some days you venture to the forest edge with other men from the village searching for fallen branches, dead wood, anything that will burn. The Lord's forest is forbidden. Taking wood there means punishment, but the common wood is nearly stripped bare. On those trips the cold is worse. Away from the village, away from walls and fire, the wind cuts through every layer you wear, your fingers go numb inside your gloves. Your face stings until it goes numb too. And then you worry about frostbite, about the stories of men who lost ears or noses to winter's bite. You walk hunched, against the wind, scanning the ground for fuel, carrying your small axe in case you find a branch worth cutting. The forest in winter is a dead place, silent, except for the crack of ice-laden branches, the occasional call of a crow. When you find wood, you bundle it and carry it home on your back. The weight is both burden and reassurance, proof that tonight's fire will burn, that warmth can be maintained one more day. Back in the village you pass the blacksmith's workshop. Even in winter his forge glows, the heat from his fire bleeding through the wooden walls. He's one of the few who stays warm by trade. His cottage is built directly against his forge, sharing a wall so that the fire warms both spaces at once. You can hear the ring of his hammer on metal, a steady rhythm that punctuates the village soundscape. He's making hinges, nails, tools that others will need when planting season returns. The church stands at the village center, a stone structure that dwarfs every cottage. Its walls are thick, its windows narrow slits. Its design meant to endure centuries of winter. On Sundays the whole village gathers inside. The stone holds cold like a fist and the church feels colder than the outdoors for the first hour. But as bodies crowd together, as breath and body heat accumulate in the enclosed space, a strange warmth builds, not comfort exactly, but relief from the wind, a shared pocket of slightly less brutal air. The priest speaks of salvation, of endurance, of the promise that winter always yields to spring. You listen with half attention, more focused on the warmth of the person pressed beside you than on theology. The church, like your cottage, is architecture as survival. Its thick walls keep out wind. Its high ceiling allows heat to rise above where people sit. Its narrow windows prevent drafts while admitting thin winter light. Someone built this place centuries ago. You think someone stacked these stones, mixed this mortar, raised these walls, knowing that generations of freezing villagers would huddle inside. There's a continuity to that thought, a connection across time. You are cold in the same space. Your grandparents were cold, and your grandchildren will be cold here too. After church, you return to your cottage. Your wife has prepared a midday meal, cabbage boiled with a scrap of salted pork bread. That's gone hard but fills the stomach. You eat slowly, chewing thoroughly. Food is fuel, especially in winter, and you've learned to savor every mouthful, even when the flavor is bland. The cabbage was stored in the root cellar, a small pit dug beneath your cottage's floor covered with boards. The cellar stays just above freezing, cool enough to prevent rot, warm enough to prevent total freezing. You dug that cellar yourself years ago, carving through frost-hardened earth with a spade and determination. It's one of the architectural features you're most proud of, though no one would ever call it beautiful. In autumn, you filled it with turnips, carrots, cabbages, sacks of grain, everything you could store against the hungry months. Now, in late winter, the cellar is more than half empty. Every trip down there is a reminder of time passing, of stores diminishing. You calculate in your head, how many weeks until planting, how many meals left in the stores, whether you've rationed carefully enough. After the meal, your wife returns to her spinning. She sits near the fire with a gaff and spindle, transforming raw wool into thread in a process so familiar. Her hands work almost without thought. The spinning wool sits idle in the corner, it's too cold to work the treadle for hours and the simpler hand spindle suffices for winter production. Come spring she'll return to the wheel, producing thread faster, but for now the slow method prevails. The children play near the hearth. Their games quiet and small. There's no space for running, no energy for loud play. They build small structures from sticks and stones, mimicking the surrounding architecture. Even in play they're learning to think about shelter, about building, about walls against the cold. You watch them for a moment, feeling a mixture of tenderness and worry. Will they remember this winter? Will it be one of the mild ones or one of the stories old people tell? You push the thought away. There's work to do, always work, even when work is simply maintenance, preservation, waiting. You take up a piece of wood and your carving knife, shaping a new spoon to replace one that cracked. The work is meditative, repetitive, requiring just enough focus to occupy your mind without exhausting it. Around you, the cottage cars and settles. Timber expands and contracts with temperature changes, nails work loose, dorm cracks in ways you'll repair when weather allows. The building is alive in its way, constantly shifting, constantly needing attention. You've lived in this cottage your entire adult life, and you know every weak point, every draft, every place where water might intrude. When your father built this place, or rather when he and the other village men built it together, because no one builds alone, they didn't have grand plans or written designs. They had knowledge passed down, practical wisdom about angles and materials and how to stack wood, so walls stay straight. The cottage is crude by any nobleman's standard, but it works and that's all that matters. Its design has been refined over generations of trial and error. The steeply pitched roof, your grandfather learned that lesson when his father's shallow roof collapsed under snow. The smoke hole positioned just so. That took decades to figure out. Finding the right spot where smoke escapes without letting too much weather in the thickness of the walls, just enough to block wind, without using so much material. That building becomes impossible. Every element represents someone's failure made into someone else's success, architecture of necessity, of incremental improvement, of desperate innovation. As afternoon fades, though, in February, afternoon and morning blur together in the same gray light, you bank the fire for the coming night. You push hot coals to the center, cover them with ash to slow their burning. Add one large log that will burn slowly for hours. The goal is to keep fire alive through the night without wasting wood. A balance between warmth and conservation, between comfort and survival. You seal the door as best you can, stuffing more rags into gaps where the wind has worn them away. You check the smoke hole, making sure it's clear but not too open. Then you settle onto your straw mattress, the children already asleep beside you, your wife close enough that her warmth adds to yours. The cottage grows darker as the fire dims, the only light coming from the red glow beneath the ash. Outside, the wind picks up. You hear it whistling through the village, rattling shutters, moaning through gaps in walls. But inside, surrounded by walls you understand, by architecture, you trust, you close your eyes. The cold presses close, but it doesn't reach you, not quite. Tomorrow will be much like today and the day after will be much like tomorrow. This is winter, this is survival, and these walls, imperfect, drafty, smoke-stained walls are the thin line between endurance and freezing, between life and the white silence of the fields. You've learned to love them, these walls, not for beauty but for what they give you, survival, shaped into form one more day. Somewhere in Burgundy, in the year of our Lord 1385, a man named Steindul wakes in a room filled with the smell of stone dust and old mortar. He is 42 years old, a master mason in the guild, and his hands are scarred maps of every wall he's ever raised. The dawn light filters through a narrow window, gray and hesitant, casting no warmth into the small chamber. Etienne lies still for a moment, listening to the silence that precedes the monastery's first bell. His room is attached to the monastery where he's been working for 3 years now, rebuilding a chapel that winter had slowly destroyed. The monks gave him this space as part of his payment, a rare privilege for a craftsman. This shelter within stone walls instead of timber and dorm. The surrounding walls are thick limestone, quarried from the same pit that supplies his building stones. They bear the chisel marks of masons, long dead men whose names are forgotten but whose work remains. The room is cold, but differently colder than a peasant's cottage. Stone holds cold, like it holds memory, deep and persistent, releasing it slowly throughout the day. A peasant's wee and dorm dwelling bleeds warmth quickly, but also warms quickly when the fire is lit. Stone is slower, more stubborn, demanding patience from those who live within its embrace. But stone also holds warmth, once earned. Last night Etienne slept beside the lime kiln where mortar is prepared, and the residual heat from yesterday's fire kept the worst of the frost at bay. The kiln is a massive brick structure, its interior blackened by countless firings capable of transforming chunks of limestone into the cosmic quicklime that forms mortar's essential ingredient. The heat it generates is profound, almost violent, but by evening it mellows into a steady, radiant comfort. He rises stiffly, his joints protesting the cold and the years of physical labor. A mason's body ages quickly, the constant lifting, the awkward positions, the endless battle between human strength and gravity's pull on stone. His left shoulder carries an old injury from a stone that slipped from scaffolding 10 years ago. His right knee clicks and grinds when he climbs, a souvenir from a winter fall on ice. Slicked staging. These are the dues paid for working in stone, the price of a craft that demands the body sacrifice itself to permanence. Etienne accepts this without bitterness, understanding that soft hands build nothing that lasts. He dresses in layers, much like a peasant would, but his outer tunic is marked with the guild symbol stitched near the shoulder. It's a small thing, that symbol, but it means everything, proof of skill, of belonging, of a life defined by craft rather than fields. The symbol shows a square and compass crossed over a stone block embroidered in dark thread that his wife stitched years ago. She died of fever the winter. He turned 35, leaving him with the tunic and memories of her hands working the needle. By firelight. He pulls on woolen hose, wrapping cloth strips around his calves for extra warmth. Over his shirt goes a vest of quilted linen, then the marked tunic, then a heavy cloak of undyed wool. His boots are leather, well made but worn, the soles patched twice already this year. A mason spends his days standing on stone, on scaffolding, on surfaces that show no mercy to cheap footwear. Before heading to the work site, Etienne breaks his fast with the monks. The monastery refectory is a long stone hall with a vat ceiling, and even with a fire burning in the massive hearth the space feels cold. The vault overhead is a marvel of engineering, each stone cut to precise angles, forming ribs that meet at decorative bosses carved with religious imagery. Etienne studies these vaults whenever he eats here, noting how the medieval builders solved the problem of spanning wide spaces with stone. But there's bread, still warm from the bakehouse, and weak beer to wash it down. The monks eat in silence, as their rule requires, and Etienne respects this, chewing slowly, gathering his thoughts for the day ahead. The bread is dark, rye, dense and filling, made from grain the monastery grows on its own lands. The beer is thin, barely fermented, meant more for hydration than intoxication in a time when water often carries disease. Around him, monks bow their heads over simple wooden bowls, their faces shadowed by cowls. Some are young, barely past boyhood, still learning the rhythms of monastic life. Others are ancient, their faces lined like the bark of old trees, men who have spent 50 winters within these walls. They move slowly, economically, their gestures worn smooth by decades of repetition. One monk reads aloud from a lectern, his voice echoing off stone walls, reciting passages about humility and labor. Etienne doesn't understand all the Latin, but he grasps the essential message: work is prayer, prayer is work. He finds this idea congenial. When he lays stone, he feels something similar, a focusing of mind and body toward a single purpose, a temporary transcendence of self in service to something larger. Today he'll work on the north wall of the chapel, the side that takes the worst of winter's assault. The previous wall, built poorly, he suspects, or simply worn down by centuries of frost, had begun to buckle inward last spring. The north face of any building suffers most from cold and damp. Sun rarely reaches it even in summer, and winter wind drives rain and snow against it with particular fury. By summer, cracks had appeared. By autumn the decision was made: tear it down before it falls. Rebuild it properly, make it last another 300 years. Etienne had walked the perimeter of the failing wall, pressing his palms against the cold stone, feeling for weakness. The mortar crumbled under his fingers in places and several stones rocked when pushed. He could read the wall's history and its defects. Somewhere in the distant past, a mason had mixed mortar with too much sand or the wrong kind of lime, or had laid stones during a frost. Small mistakes, perhaps made under pressure to finish quickly, or by someone less skilled, or simply through bad luck. But mistakes in stone compound over time, and what begins as a hairline crack becomes over decades a fundamental failure. Etienne had submitted his design to the abbot, explaining in careful detail why the wall needed to be thicker, why the mortar must be mixed differently, why certain stones must go in certain positions. The abbot, to his credit, listened and approved both the plan and the expense. The meeting had taken place in the abbot's chamber, a room warmed by a brazier and lined with manuscripts. Etienne had brought drawings, scratched on slate, showing cross-sections of the proposed wall. He'd explained the principle of headers and stretches, how stones must interlock in alternating patterns to distribute load. He talked about foundation depth, about the need to reach bedrock or solid clay beneath the loose topsoil. The abbot had asked intelligent questions, revealing a mind that understood buildings, even if his hands had never lifted stone. They'd negotiated costs, timelines, the allocation of monastery labor to support the work. Now, months into winter, the wall is half built. It rises from the foundation like a promise, each stone carefully placed, each joint filled with mortar mixed to Etienne's exacting standards. The foundation trenches had been dug in autumn before the ground froze. They'd found good clay at 6 feet, and Etienne had laid large, flat stones as footings, creating a stable base that would resist settling. He walks to the site as dawn breaks, gray and reluctant over the monastery grounds. His apprentice, a boy named Thomas, is already there, having slept in the workshop to tend the kiln overnight. The walk from refectory to work site takes Etienne across the monastery's main courtyard, past the church entrance, through a covered passage. His breath makes clouds in the cold air and frost crunches beneath his boots. Thomas is 16, strong, but still learning the difference between strength and skill. He can lift heavy stones, but he doesn't yet understand why one stone belongs here and another there. The boy is the son of a carpenter apprenticed to Etienne 3 years ago when his father could no longer feed all his children. He shows promise, learns quickly, rarely needs to be told something twice. Etienne greets him with a nod, and together they inspect yesterday's work. Frost has formed on the exposed mortar and Etienne runs his fingers over it, checking for cracks. The fresh mortar appears intact, no spider webbing of stress, fractures, no separation from the stone faces. This is always the crucial moment. If frost penetrates wet mortar before it sets, the ice crystals expand and destroy the bond. The mortar is his own formulation, lime, mixed with sand and a small amount of crushed volcanic stone he traded for at great cost. The volcanic stone makes the mortar stronger, more resistant to freeze-thaw cycles that destroy ordinary mixtures. He'd obtained the volcanic stone from a traveling merchant who'd brought it from the far south, from mountains that still smoke and rumble. The merchant had no idea of its value for building, thought it merely decorative. He learned this trick from an older mason who learned it from his master, who might have learned it from someone who once saw Roman ruins. Knowledge passes down like this through generations of craftsmen, refined by each in turn. The Romans built with a mastery that medieval Europe struggles to replicate, their roads and aqueducts standing centuries after their empire fell. Etienne has seen their work in the south, great stone structures that mock modern attempts at permanence. Satisfied that the frost hasn't damaged the fresh work, Etienne begins the day's labor first selecting stones from the pile delivered by cart from the quarry 8 miles away. The quarry is a gash in a hillside where men with wedges and hammers split stone from living rock. The monastery owns the quarry, operates it with a mix of hired labor and peasants working off debts. Not every stone is suitable. He's looking for limestone blocks of particular dimensions with certain grain patterns, free of obvious flaws or fractures. Limestone varies in quality, even within a single quarry bed. Some stone is dense and hard, almost impossible to cut, but tremendously durable. Other stone is softer, easier to shape, but more prone to weathering and erosion. The best building stone strikes a balance, hard enough to endure, soft enough to work. He finds one that feels right, weighs perhaps 50 pounds, rectangular, with one face already dressed smooth by quarry workers. He hoists it onto a wooden platform at waist height, then begins the fine work of shaping. The platform is worn smooth by years of use, stained with stone dust and dried mortar. Various tools hang from pegs driven into its frame, chisels of different widths, hammers of different weights, measuring sticks notched with standard dimensions. With a heavy chisel and wooden mallet, he strikes careful blows along the stone's edge, trimming away irregularities, creating a surface that will sit flush against its neighbors. Stone dust rises with each strike, settling on his hands, his clothes, coating his lungs with the particular taste of limestone. Each blow sends vibrations through the chisel handle, through his hand, up his arm. The sound is sharp and clear when the stone is solid, dull and hollow, when a hidden floor lurks beneath the surface. This is patient work, meditative in its repetition, strike, check, strike again. Too much force and the stone splits wrong. Too little and the shaping takes all day. Etienne has dressed thousands of stones in his career, maybe tens of thousands. His hands know the work so deeply that conscious thought retreats, leaving only the rhythm of mallet on chisel, chisel on stone. He works without hurry. Winter has already slowed everything. The mortar sets slower in cold. The stones themselves seem heavier when fingers are numb, and fighting the season's pace only leads to mistakes. In summer a good mason might dress and lay 40 stones in a day. In deep winter, 20 is an achievement, 15 is acceptable, 10 is sometimes the best that can be managed. Thomas prepares mortar at the mixing station, combining lime paste with sand and water in proportions Etienne has taught him. The mixture must be neither too wet nor too dry, smooth enough to spread but firm enough to hold. The lime paste is slaked quick. Lime, the cosmic powder mixed with water in a controlled process that generates tremendous heat. This must be done carefully in small batches because uncontrolled slaking can cause explosions or fires. The sand is river sand, washed to remove clay and organic matter that would weaken the mortar. The water is drawn from the monastery, well cold and clear, its temperature affecting how the mortar behaves. In summer mortar sets in an hour or two. In February, it might take a full day to harden properly, and fresh work must be protected from frost overnight with straw and hides. The chemistry of lime mortar is complex, something Etienne understands through experience rather than formal knowledge. Lime slowly reabsorbs carbon dioxide from the air, gradually transforming back into limestone. This process, called carbonation, is what gives mortar its strength, but it requires time, requires the right balance of moisture and temperature, fails if rushed or frozen. When the stone is shaped to satisfaction, Etienne and Thomas lift it together, carrying it to the wall. They've built scaffolding, wooden platforms held up by poles wedged into sockets left in the masonry to reach the higher courses. The scaffolding is a structure within a structure, a temporary framework that enables the permanent. It's lashed together with rope, reinforced with diagonal bracing. Each platform tested before weight is committed to it. The scaffolding cars under their weight and the stones. Etienne has built on scaffolds for 30 years, and he's learned to read their sounds, to know when a platform is secure and when it's beginning to fail. He's seen scaffolds collapse, witnessed men fall to their deaths or crippling injuries. Every mason carries these memories, uses them to sharpen caution without breeding paralysis. They position the stone on a bed of fresh mortar and Etienne taps it gently with his mallet, settling it into place. The mortar squelches out from the joints and Thomas scrapes away the excess, packing it back into gaps with a tell. The tapping must be gentle but firm enough to seat the stone without disturbing its neighbors. Each stone added to a course affects the stones already laid, transmitting force and pressure through the growing structure. Each stone must be level, must be plumb, must align with an invisible standard of rightness that Etienne carries in his mind. He checks with a plumb line, a simple tool, a string with a lead weight that shows him true vertical. The plumb line is ancient technology, unchanged for thousands of years, because it cannot be improved. Gravity ensures the weight hangs straight down and the string shows that direction with perfect honesty. Satisfied, they move to the next stone, and the next, and the next. The rhythm of work establishes itself, a pattern of selection, shaping, lifting, placing, checking. Hours pass in this rhythm, marked not by clock but by the sun's slow arc across the winter sky. The work is repetitive, but each repetition matters. A wall is only as strong as its weakest stone, only as straight as its most crooked course. A single poorly laid stone might not fail for decades, but eventually it will. Water will find the weak joint, frost will exploit it and the failure will spread to neighboring stones. Etienne thinks about this often. How small errors compound, how one badly placed stone can undermine an entire structure over decades. He thinks about the masons who built the wall he's now replacing. Wonders if they knew their work would fail or if they did the best they could with what they had. Perhaps they were rushed, pressed to finish before winter or before their contract expired. Perhaps they lacked good materials, made do with inferior lime or poorly cut stone. Or perhaps they were simply unlucky victims of a particularly harsh winter or an earthquake or some other circumstance beyond their control. Etienne tries not to judge them harshly, knowing his own work will someday be similarly evaluated. He's determined that his wall will last, not for glory. Masons rarely sign their work, rarely receive recognition beyond their pay, but for pride, for the quiet satisfaction of doing something correctly. The medieval world operates on different principles than glory. Names fade, memories dim, but stone remains, bearing silent witness to the care or carelessness of its builders. By midday, they've laid perhaps 20 stones, raising the wall by one more course. It doesn't look like much progress. But Stein knows that walls are built slowly, that hurrying leads to failure. Each course represents perhaps 4 in of height. The wall, when complete, will stand 18 foot tall, requiring roughly 50 courses of stone. They break for a meal brought by a monastery servant, more bread, some cheese, a cup of thin soup. They eat on the scaffolding legs, dangling over the edge, looking out over the monastery grounds. The servant is an older woman, a lay worker, who tends the monastery kitchen in exchange for food and shelter. She climbs the scaffolding carefully, her hands gnarled with age, balancing the basket of food with practiced ease. From this height, Etienne can see the whole complex, the church with its nave, and transept the cloister where monks walk in contemplation, the dormitory, the refectory, the various workshops and storehouses. The monastery is a small city unto itself, nearly self-sufficient, producing most of what it needs from its own lands and labor. Only specialized goods, iron, tools, certain foodstuffs, books must be brought from outside. Every building is stone, every roof is tile or slate. This is architecture meant to outlast generations, meant to serve communities that haven't been born yet. The investment required to build in stone is enormous, possible only for institutions that think in centuries rather than years. A peasant builds his cottage in weeks, with materials at hand, knowing it might last 20 years if he's lucky. He thinks about the design choices made by whoever planned this place. The cloister, for instance, is positioned on the south side of the church. Arranged around a square courtyard, the cloister is enclosed by covered walkways on all four sides, with columns supporting thatched ceilings. In the center, an open space lets light and rain fall on a small garden. This placement is deliberate. South-facing arcades catch what little winter sun breaks through the clouds, and the sheltered courtyard creates a microclimate slightly warmer than the open grounds beyond. The walls surrounding the courtyard block wind, trap heat, allow delicate herbs to grow that would perish in the exposed fields. This is architecture as environmental modification, creating pockets of habitability through intelligent arrangement. The church itself is oriented east-west, altar facing sunrise, main entrance facing sunset. This orientation is theological, yes, but also practical. It means the nave's long axis runs perpendicular to prevailing winds, reducing drafts during services. The east-west axis is nearly universal in Christian architecture, rooted in symbolism but reinforced by practical experience. A church aligned north-south would be sliced by winter winds, making the space unbearable during lengthy services. The windows are small, narrow slits in thick walls. They admit light but minimize heat loss. A balance between illumination and warmth. In warmer climates, churches can afford large windows, even walls of glass. In Burgundy's winters, such extravagance would be impossible without fires burning constantly, consuming forests to heat empty space. Ten has studied these designs, learned from them. When he builds, he thinks not just about structure but about how people will inhabit the space, how they'll move through it in different seasons, where they'll gather. For warmth. Good architecture anticipates human behavior, creates spaces that feel natural to use, doorways placed where people naturally want to walk, hearths positioned where their heat does the most. Good architecture, he's learned, is a conversation between human needs and physical limits. Stone can only span so far before it needs support. Walls can only rise so high before they need buttressing. Roofs must shed water and snow without collapsing. These limits are not arbitrary but arise from the nature of materials and forces. Stone is strong in compression but weak in tension, meaning it can be stacked high but cannot bridge wide gaps. Without arching within these constraints, a skilled mason finds room for grace, for subtle improvements, for innovations that future builders will adopt without knowing whose mind first conceived them. Architecture advances through these small innovations, each generation, adding to the accumulated wisdom of the craft. After the meal, they return to work. The afternoon light is already dimming. February days are short, and they'll only have a few more hours before darkness makes the work too dangerous. The sun, never high even at noon, sinks early toward the western hills. Shadows lengthen across the construction site, making it harder to see the fine details of stone edges and mortar joints. Etienne works faster now, not rushing, but moving with practiced efficiency. Each stone is still checked, still fitted carefully, but his hands know the motions so well that thought and action merge. This is mastery, when the body executes the craft without conscious direction, leaving the mind free to plan the next move, the next course, the overall pattern. It's a state of flow that Etienne achieves only after hours of warming up, and it never lasts long enough. Thomas watches and learns. He sees how his master reads the stone, how a slight tap here changes everything, how mortar spreads with just the right pressure on the trowel. The boy is learning not just techniques but judgment, the ability to see a stone and know instantly whether it belongs in this position or that. This kind of knowledge cannot be taught through words alone. These are lessons that can't be spoken, only shown. Someday Thomas will teach his own apprentice the same way, passing down not just techniques but a way of thinking about stone, about walls, about the slow, patient work of building things that last. The guild system ensures this transmission of knowledge across generations. An apprentice serves 7 years, learning by observation and practice, his hands gradually acquiring the muscle memory that defines the craft. As the light fails, they stop work. The final stone of the day is set, the mortar smoothed, the tools cleaned and stored. The tools are valuable, representing significant investment. Each chisel, each trowel, each level and square is maintained, carefully, sharpened when dull, oiled against rust, stored in a locked chest. At night, Stain climbs down from the scaffolding, his knees protesting, his shoulders aching. He's been doing this for 3 decades and each year the work gets slightly harder, takes slightly longer to recover from. His body is beginning to impose limits that youth never knew. Mornings require more time to loosen stiff joints. Evenings bring deeper exhaustion, small injuries take longer to heal, but he's proud of what he's built. Today, 20 stones might not seem significant, but in a wall that will stand for centuries, each one matters. He calculates mentally, 20 stones per day, perhaps 120 days of building weather remaining before next winter. That means 2,400 stones, enough to complete the wall and begin the roof structure. He and Thomas cover the fresh work with straw and old canvas, protecting it from overnight frost. If the mortar freezes before it sets properly, the wall will be weak, prone to failure. The protective covering is held down with stones and wooden weights to prevent wind from tearing it away. This nightly ritual is essential, an insurance policy against the weather's caprice. Then they retreat to the warmth of the kiln room. The kiln is brick, barrel-shaped, designed to burn wood or charcoal at high temperatures to transform limestone into quick lime. The kiln represents significant technical knowledge, its design, refined over centuries to achieve the temperatures necessary for calcination. Too cool and the limestone won't convert. Too hot and the fuel is wasted. The fire has burned down, but the bricks still radiate warmth. Etienne sits near them, feeling heat seep into his cold joints, his aching back. The kiln's thermal mass is enormous, thousands of bricks that absorb heat during firing and release it slowly over hours. This residual heat is a gift to the workers who tend it. Thomas adds a few logs to the embers, building up the fire. For the night, the kiln room becomes almost comfortable, a pocket of genuine warmth in the monastery's cold stone embrace. The logs are oak, dense and slow, burning provided by the monastery from its managed forests. The crackling fire adds light to the room, shadows dancing across brick walls. They sit in companionable silence, too tired for much talk. Outside, snow begins to fall, small, dry flakes that hiss against the windows. This snow is the powdery kind, more ice than water, driven by wind, rather than falling straight. It won't accumulate much, but signals that colder weather is coming. Etienne thinks about the wall, about tomorrow's work, about the 100 small decisions he'll make as the structure rises. He thinks about winter, about how every stone he lays is an argument against the cold. Buildings, he's learned, are armor, not for single bodies but for communities, for ideas, for the fragile flame of human civilization that winter constantly threatens to extinguish. Without shelter, human life in northern climates would be impossible. Stone buildings make civilization viable, create spaces where learning can occur, where manuscripts can be preserved, where communities can gather. The monastery chapel he's rebuilding will shelter monks for centuries. After he's dead they'll kneel on the stone floors. He's laying prey beneath the ceiling he's supporting, never knowing his name. This anonymity doesn't trouble Etienne. He finds it liberating in a way to work without the burden of personal recognition, to serve the craft itself rather than his own reputation. But they'll benefit from his choices, from his knowledge of how stone behaves in winter, from his careful attention to joints and angles and the 100 invisible details that make a wall strong. That's enough, he thinks. The quality will speak for itself, visible to anyone who knows how to look. Future masons will see his work and recognize competence, even if they never learn his identity. That's always been enough. Thomas falls asleep sitting up and Etienne doesn't wake him. The boy works hard, deserves rest. The apprentice's head droops forward, his breathing deepens, his hands relax in his lap. He's still young enough that sleep comes easily, overriding discomfort and strangeness of place. Etienne remains awake a bit longer, watching firelight play across the brick interior of the kiln. He's thinking about a house he wants to build someday, a small place of his own. The house exists in his imagination with vivid specificity, where each room will sit, how the hearth will draw, where morning light will fall. He's refined this vision over years, adjusting details, solving problems before they arise. Not a cottage of wee and dorm, but real stone. A modest dwelling perhaps, but with thick walls that don't leak, with a proper chimney that draws smoke cleanly out, with windows that can be shuttered tight against wind. The house will be built in stages as time and money allow. First the foundation and walls, using stone, he can acquire at reduced cost from the quarry. He's been saving his wages, planning this in quiet moments. The house exists first in his mind. Each stone already placed, each joint already mortared. His savings are kept with the guild, earning no interest but protected from theft and loss. Each season he adds to the sum, calculating how many more winters of work he'll need before he can begin someday. Perhaps in 5 years, when the chapel is finished and his back hasn't completely given out, he'll build it. He'll call in favors from other guild members. Help them with their projects in exchange for their help with his. The guild operates on reciprocity, members supporting each other through the feast, famine, cycles of construction work. Help given freely, returns when needed, creating networks of obligation and trust. It will be a small monument, not to ego but to craft, proof that a mason who spends his days building for others can also build for himself. The house will demonstrate techniques he's refined over decades, solutions to problems he's encountered and solved. It will be his masterwork, the culmination of a lifetime's learning. For now, though, there's the chapel wall, and after this wall, other walls. The monastery contract has 2 years remaining, assuming winter doesn't extend the timeline. After that, he's heard of work available in a nearby town, a merchant's hall that needs construction. The work is never finished, never complete. Stone endures, but it also requires endless maintenance, endless vigilance against entropy and weather. Every building is slowly falling, apart from the moment it's completed. Mortar erodes, stones crack, roofs leak, foundations settle. Etienne's role is temporary. He'll build, then move on, leaving his work to outlast him. Someone else will repair what he builds, will add to it, will eventually replace it when time and winter finally win. This is the nature of the craft. Each mason is a link in a chain stretching back to ancient builders and forward to craftsmen not yet born. But that defeat is centuries away. For now the wall stands, rising stone by stone against the cold. The north wall will face winter's assault for decades, for centuries, holding firm because Etienne chose the right stones, mixed the right mortar, paid attention to details others might have overlooked. This is his contribution to the future. He closes his eyes, still feeling the warmth of the kiln bricks against his back. His hands, even at rest, remember the weight of the mallet, the texture of limestone, the satisfaction of stones settling into place. The muscle memory is so deep that his fingers sometimes twitch in sleep, acting out the motions of the day's work. His dreams are often of walls, rising courses, stacking structures, climbing toward completion. Tomorrow he'll wake and build again, stone by stone, winter by winter, raising walls that shelter, that endure, that argue quietly with the cold. The sun will rise gray and reluctant. The frost will need checking, the stones will need selecting and shaping. The work will continue as it always has, as it always will. It's not glory, but it's enough. Etienne opens his eyes once more, studying the shadows cast by the dying fire. He thinks of all the walls he's built, scattered across Burgundy, standing silent in the darkness. Some he remembers clearly: the merchant's house in Dijon with its ornate window frames, the bridge abutment near Beaune that required foundation work in a river's current. Others blur together, becoming a general memory of stone and mortar and effort. But each one stands or stood testament to the accumulated skill of his hands. Each one made someone's life slightly better, slightly safer, slightly warmer. This is the mason's consolation. The work remains when the worker is gone. In a world where so much is impermanent, where lives are brief and memories briefer, stone offers something like immortality, not personal immortality. Stein has no illusions about that. But the immortality of craft, of human effort directed toward permanence. He stands slowly, feeling his joints complain, and checks the fire one last time. The logs are catching well, will burn safely through the night. Thomas sleeps on his young face, peaceful, in the fire light. Etienne covers him with an old cloak, then makes his way to his own chamber. The monastery is silent now, the monks long since retired to their cells. His footsteps echo in stone corridors, the sound swallowed by darkness. In his room, Etienne removes only his boots and outer cloak before lying down. The cold is too intense for full undressing, and stone walls offer no barrier to winter's reach. He pulls his blanket tight, wool, worn thin in places but still serviceable, and closes his eyes. The bed is a simple pallet stuffed with straw that needs replacing soon. Sleep comes slowly, his mind still turning over the day's work, planning tomorrow's sequence. Did he set that one stone properly? Should he adjust the scaffold before going higher? These questions circle through his thoughts, gradually losing coherence as exhaustion claims him. His last conscious thought is of the wall standing in darkness waiting for morning. Outside snow continues to fall. It settles on the half-built chapel covering the protected mortar, accumulating on scaffolding and stone piles. The monastery sleeps, within its stone embrace, 40 monks and a handful of lay workers, all sheltered by walls that other masons built in other winters. The continuity of craft makes this shelter possible, each generation maintaining what the previous generation raised. And somewhere in the darkness, Etienne's wall stands incomplete, a promise half fulfilled. By spring, it will be finished, ready to face the next century's storms. But tonight it simply exists, stone upon stone, mortar between, a human argument against entropy. Tomorrow, Etienne will return. We'll add 20 more stones, we'll continue the patient work of building things that last. It's not glory, but it's enough. It's always been enough. Centuries later, in the fading light of a modern autumn afternoon, an archaeologist named Dr. Margaret Hollis presses her hand against the interior wall of a medieval church in rural France. The stone feels warm beneath her palm, not merely the retained heat of the day, but something else, something that shouldn't exist in October's cooling air. She's been studying this church for 3 years now, part of a broader research project examining medieval thermal architecture, and she's discovered something that defies easy explanation. These stones hold heat far longer than they should. Standard limestone, the material from which most medieval churches were built, has predictable thermal properties. It absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly at night, but the process follows known physical laws. Yet this church and several others she's examined across Burgundy and Champagne don't quite behave as expected. At midnight, hours after the last sunlight touched the walls, the stones remain perceptibly warm to the touch. Dr. Hollis has measured this phenomenon with modern instruments, infrared thermography, thermal conductivity probes, careful temperature monitoring over weeks. The data confirms what her hand tells her. Something about these stones is different. She's not the first to notice. Medieval texts, monastery records, guild documents, scattered letters between church officials contain occasional references to warm walls and blessed stones. One chronicle from 1347 describes a chapel where monks could sleep comfortably without fire, even in January. The writer attributed this to divine blessing, to prayers sanctifying the very stones. Modern science doesn't accept such explanations, but it also struggles to fully account for what Dr. Hollis is measuring. Her current hypothesis involves the mortar. Medieval builders used lime mortar mixed from limestone, heated in kiln until it transformed into quicklime, then slaked with water and combined with sand. But different guilds, different regions, different master masons had their own recipes. Some added crushed ceramics, others volcanic ash, some incorporated organic materials, bone powder, animal fat, even blood. These additives changed the mortar's properties in subtle ways. Perhaps they changed thermal properties too, in ways that compound over centuries, in ways that modern concrete builders have forgotten. Dr. Hollis sits in the church as twilight deepens, outside her laptop glowing in the dimming light. She's reviewing material analysis from stone samples she's collected, with permission from church authorities, tiny cores drilled from mortar joints, examined under microscopes, subjected to chemical analysis. The results are puzzling. The mortar contains standard medieval ingredients: lime, sand, water, but also traces of materials that shouldn't be there or shouldn't be in these proportions, small amounts of volcanic ash, for instance. Not humus or easily recognized volcanic stone, but microscopic particles of ash, possibly carried from distant volcanic regions. How did medieval masons in landlocked Burgundy acquire volcanic ash? Perhaps through trade networks that brought materials from Italy, from regions near ancient volcanoes? Or perhaps they stumbled upon local deposits, ancient volcanic remnants, buried and forgotten, rediscovered by quarry workers who didn't recognize what they'd found but noticed that stone from certain pits made better mortar. The empirical knowledge of where to source materials might have mattered more than understanding why those materials worked. There's also animal fat in the mortar, detectable in chemical traces. This isn't surprising. Medieval texts occasionally mention adding tallow to lime mixtures to make them more workable, but the quantity here seems significant, deliberate, as if the builders knew that fat molecules trapped within the mortar's crystalline structure might alter how the material behaves thermally. Fat changes, freezing points changes, how water moves through porous materials. It could theoretically reduce the damage from freeze-thaw cycles that destroy most medieval structures, but could it also affect thermal retention? Dr. Hollis isn't certain, and her colleagues are skeptical of the hypothesis. She's run simulations, built computer models of how fatty molecules might arrange themselves within lime mortar's porous matrix. The model suggests that fat could create microscopic barriers that trap air pockets, and trapped air is one of nature's best insulators. Yet the concentrations she's finding seem too small to account for the effect she's measuring. There must be something else working in concert with the fat, some synergistic relationship between multiple additives. Another possibility emerges from her research into medieval construction practices. Some guilds, she's learned, incorporated ritualized heating of stones before installation. One obscure text from a German monastery describes masons placing stones near fires overnight before setting them in walls, claiming this awakened the stone's natural warmth. The account reads like superstition. But what if there's physics underneath the mysticism? Limestone, when heated and then slowly cooled, under subtle changes in its crystalline structure, perhaps repeated heating during quarrying, during shaping, during the lime-making process creates stones with altered thermal properties. She makes notes, cross-referencing with geology texts, trying to find modern research on heat-treated limestone. There's not much. Contemporary builders don't heat-treat stone, so why would anyone study it? The few papers she finds discuss high-temperature metamorphism, where limestone transforms into marble under extreme heat and pressure. But those conditions are far beyond what medieval masons could achieve with wood fires. Still, even moderate heating might induce changes at the microscopic level, realignment of calcite crystals, redistribution of impurities, alterations in polity. These changes might not be dramatic enough to turn limestone into a different rock, but subtle enough to shift its thermal behavior. Dr. Hollis has requested time on a secretion X-ray beam line to examine her samples at near resolution. The proposal has been accepted, but the facility is booked months in advance and she must wait her turn. The church grows darker around her. She's alone here now, the village priest having locked the main doors but trusting her with a key to the side entrance. He's an elderly man, Father Michel, who grew up in this village and has served this church for 40 years. He's watched Dr. Hollis's work with reused interest, occasionally sharing stories. His grandmother told him about the church's peculiar warmth. According to village tradition, pregnant women used to come to the church during winter months, believing the warm stones eased their discomfort. Father Michel's own grandmother claimed to have spent her final trimester sleeping against the south wall, where the warmth was said to be most concentrated. Medical science would dismiss such practices as superstition, but Dr. Hollis wonders if those women had stumbled upon something real. Warmth does ease muscle tension, improves circulation, provides genuine physical comfort that could benefit pregnancy. She switches off her laptop to save battery and sits in the darkness, letting her eyes adjust moonlight filters through narrow windows, painting geometric patterns on the stone floor. The silence is profound, no traffic noise, no electrical hum, just the old silence that medieval people knew, broken only by the subtle sounds of stone settling, of wind against walls. Dr. Hollis stands and walks along the nave, trailing her hand against the wall. The warmth is still there, a gentle radiance that her rational mind struggles to fully explain. She thinks about the people who built this place, master masons, whose names are lost. Apprentices who hauled stones and mixed mortar. Laborers whose backs bent underweight, measured in tons. They didn't have thermometers or thermal imaging. They had experience, observation, trial and error passed down through generations. If they discovered that certain mixtures, certain techniques made walls that held warmth better, they wouldn't have understood it in terms of thermal coefficients or specific heat capacity. They would have simply known it worked and preserved the knowledge. Medieval guilds were notoriously secretive. Master masons guarded their techniques, passing them only to trusted apprentices, sometimes encoding knowledge in symbols or cryptic workshop practices. The secrecy wasn't merely about protecting trade advantages, though that mattered. It was also about maintaining standards, ensuring that only those who had proven their skill and dedication received knowledge that, if misapplied, could result in catastrophic structural failures. A wall built with improper mortar ratios might stand for years before suddenly collapsing. A vault constructed with incorrect geometry could kill dozens when it failed during a crowded service. The stakes were high, and the guild system responded by creating rigorous apprenticeships lasting 7 years or more. Young men spent their teens and 20s learning not just techniques but judgment, when to follow rules, when to improvise, how to read stone and understand what it could bear. When the guild system collapsed, when Industrial Revolution transformed building practices, much of that tacit knowledge vanished. What couldn't be written down was forgotten. Dr. Hollis suspects she's glimpsing fragments of that lost knowledge, preserved accidentally in the walls themselves. The stones are archives containing information their builders encoded without realizing she's not alone in her fascination. Other researchers have noticed anomalies in medieval buildings, churches that stay warmer than predicted, crypts that maintain stable temperatures regardless of season, halls where acoustic properties seem impossibly refined. There's been talk of medieval engineering mysteries, though that phrase makes her uncomfortable. It suggests medieval builders had secret advanced technology, which feeds into pseudoscientific narratives about lost civilizations. The truth is likely simpler and more impressive. Medieval builders were empiricists, conducting centuries-long experiments in real-world laboratories, iterating designs based on what worked. They didn't need to understand thermodynamics to notice that walls built a certain way stayed warmer. They didn't need modern material science to discover that certain additives improved mortar's performance. Furthermore, they needed observation, memory, and the patience to refine techniques over generations. Knowledge built the way they built walls, stone by stone, lesson by lesson, each generation adding to accumulated wisdom. Dr. Hollis has been trying to reverse engineer that wisdom to translate medieval practice into modern understanding. It's slow work, complicated by gaps in the historical record and the difficulty of testing hypotheses on protected heritage structures. She can't just tear apart a medieval church to examine every layer of mortar. She must work with the tiny samples she's permitted to extract, making inferences from incomplete data. It's like trying to reconstruct a recipe. From tasting a single bite of a dish prepared centuries ago, you can identify major ingredients, but subtle seasonings, precise proportions, the order of addition, these details remain elusive. She's managed to recreate some medieval mortars in laboratory settings, mixing lime with volcanic ash and tallow. According to ratios extracted from analysis, the results are promising. Her mortar samples do show marginally improved thermal retention compared to standard lime mortar. But marginally improved doesn't fully account for what she's measuring in these churches. There must be something else, some factor she's missing. Perhaps it's not just the materials, but the methods. Medieval masons didn't have power tools, couldn't rush the process. Every stone was placed by hand, every joint carefully filled. Every surface worked slowly. The mortar was applied in thin layers, each allowed to cure before the next was added. That slowness might matter. Modern concrete poured and hardened quickly has different internal structures than medieval masonry built over months or years. Time itself might be an ingredient. Slow curing allows lime mortar to carbonate thoroughly, reacting with carbon dioxide from the air to gradually transform back into limestone. The process can take decades to complete fully, with the mortar becoming harder and more durable as years pass. Perhaps it also becomes thermally more effective, developing properties that only emerge through long carbonation. Dr. Hollis has examined mortar samples of different ages from the same church sections repaired in the 18th century versus original 14th century construction. The older mortar consistently shows superior thermal retention, even when the material composition is similar. This suggests aging matters, that medieval buildings improve with time in ways modern structures don't. We build for immediate functionality, while medieval builders created structures that matured, that became more effective the longer they stood. She's proposed experimental reconstructions, building small structures using only medieval techniques, materials and timelines, then monitoring their thermal properties over years. The proposal sits with grant committees awaiting funding that may never materialize. The challenge is convincing funding bodies to support research that won't yield results for decades. Academic careers are measured in publication metrics and grant success rates, both of which favor quick turnarounds. A project requiring 20 years to show meaningful results is a career killer for a young researcher. Dr. Hollis is fortunate to have tenure, but even tenured professors must produce regular publications to maintain credibility and secure ongoing funding. Meanwhile, she measures and speculates, accumulating data that hints at answers without quite revealing them. The mystery remains mystery preserved in warm stone and vanished knowledge. Dr. Hollis checks her watch, nearly midnight, and she should head back to her rental accommodation in the village, but she lingers a few moments longer, reluctant to leave the church's peculiar warmth. Outside October, night air has turned cold, and she's not eager to face the walk back. She thinks about medieval monks making the same calculation, whether to leave warm chapel for cold dormitory, whether the comfort of stone walls is worth abandoning for the comfort of straw mattresses. They usually chose the chapel, she knows. Medieval monasteries were designed around the church precisely because it was often the warmest building in the complex. Monks spent hours there daily, not just for prayer but for survival, gathering where warmth was most reliable. The architecture wasn't separating sacred from secular, but recognizing that warmth and sanctity could coexist, that physical comfort and spiritual practice weren't opposites but partners. A cold monk, she imagines, is a distracted monk unable to focus on devotion. So they built churches that held heat, that became thermal refugees, that justified their massive cost by serving dual purposes, houses of God and bulwarks against winter. Every society prioritizes what it needs most, and medieval Europe needed shelter from cold as much as it needed salvation. The design of Gothic churches, with their high-voted ceilings and massive stone construction, might have thermal logic alongside aesthetic ambition. High ceilings allow warm air to rise and circulate, creating convection currents that distribute heat more evenly than in low-ceiling structures. The thick stone walls act as thermal batteries, absorbing heat from candles, from the body heat of congregants packed together during services, from whatever sunlight penetrates the narrow windows. That heat is stored and released slowly, smoothing out temperature fluctuations. Dr. Hollis has studied thermographic images of the church during and after services. During Mass, with 200 people crowded into the nave, the temperature rises noticeably. Human bodies are surprisingly effective heat sources, each person radiating about 100 W. After the service ends and the congregation disperses, the temperature drops, but slowly. The stones absorb the heat, then release it over hours, extending the warmth far beyond the presence of warm bodies. In winter, when services were held multiple times daily, this effect would compound. Each service adds heat to the thermal battery, and if services are frequent enough, the church might never fully cool, maintaining a baseline warmth throughout the season. Finally, Dr. Hollis gathers her equipment and exits through the side door, locking it behind her. The night air strikes her immediately, sharp and biting, after the church's gentle warmth. The temperature difference must be at least 10 degrees Celsius. Her breath condenses instantly, forming visible clouds that drift away in the still air. She walks quickly through the sleeping village, her breath misting in moonlight. Above her stars will in cold clarity, the same stars medieval people watched on nights like this. The village is small, perhaps 300 residents, and most buildings date to the 19th century or later. The church is the oldest structure here, predating the village itself. Settlements often grew around churches, rather than churches being built in existing towns. She passes the boulangerie, darkened now but which will fill with warm bread smells come morning. She passes the small Mary with its French flag hanging limp in the windless night. Back in her room, a converted cottage now serving as tourist accommodation, she wraps herself in blankets and opens her laptop once more. She types notes while memory is fresh, recording impressions that won't make it into academic papers but matter nonetheless. The warmth is real. She writes not mystical, not imagined, but also not fully explained by current models. Medieval builders knew something we've forgotten, encoded it in proportions and practices we can measure but not fully replicate. She pauses, considering how to express her thoughts without sounding unscientific. The stones hold secrets, the way they hold heat, slowly releasing information across centuries, rewarding patience, resisting quick analysis. Perhaps that's the real lesson, that some knowledge can't be rushed, can only be understood by those willing to sit in cold churches at midnight waiting for stones to speak. She saves the document in a folder labeled Personal Observations, separate from her formal research notes. Academic writing requires certain restraints, certain tones, and these late-night reflections don't fit that mold. But they're important to her, these moments when she allows herself to think beyond the constraints of peer review and methodological rigor. Science is built on rigorous method, but it's motivated by wonder, by the desire to understand mysteries. She closes the laptop and lies back thinking about tomorrow's work, more measurements, more samples, more attempts to translate medieval craft into modern science. She'll return to the church at dawn, when the stones are coolest, to measure how quickly they begin warming as sunlight touches the eastern facade. Furthermore, she'll photograph shadows, tracking how light enters the building at different times of day and season. Furthermore, she has a theory that the narrow windows are positioned not just for structural or aesthetic reasons, but to maximize solar gain during winter while minimizing it during summer. Medieval builders understood passive solar design without having terms for it. The mystery won't be solved quickly. Perhaps it will never be fully solved. Perhaps some aspects of medieval building knowledge are truly lost, survived only in the artifacts themselves. But the search itself has value. It connects her to those anonymous builders, creates dialogue across centuries, reminds her that modern knowledge isn't complete, that past generations knew things worth recovering. She thinks about her academic colleagues who dismiss medieval technology as primitive, who assume that progress moves linearly from ignorance to enlightenment. They're wrong. She's certain of that now. Knowledge isn't linear. It's a landscape with peaks and valleys, with highlands of understanding separated by lowlands of forgetting. Medieval builders stood on peaks we've descended from, seeing views we can't currently access. Modern materials science stands on different peaks, seeing different vistas, but neither perspective is complete. The goal isn't to prove medieval builders were more advanced than we are, but to recognize that different contexts produce different knowledge. They knew their materials intimately because their lives depended on working with those materials effectively. We know our materials abstractly, through equations and models, which gives us power to innovate but distances us from intuitive understanding. Both types of knowledge have value. She falls asleep thinking about warm stones, about masons mixing mortar by firelight, about the patient accumulation of knowledge that lets humans survive in hostile climates. The surrounding cottage is cold, but wrapped in modern blankets, with central heating humming in the background, she's warmer than any medieval person could dream of being. Yet they survived, they built, they passed down enough knowledge that their walls still stand, warm, still whispering secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. They endured winters that would kill modern people accustomed to thermostats and insulated homes. The mortality rates were terrible. Of course, medieval winters killed reliably, especially the very young and very old, especially during crop failures, when malnutrition weakened immune systems. But enough people survived, that civilization continued, that knowledge accumulated, that each generation could build on the previous generation's experience. The warm churches were part of that survival strategy, offering refuge when domestic buildings failed. Dr. Hollis dreams her sleeping mind mixing memories and imagination. She dreams of medieval masons, of their callous hands mixing mortar in wooden troughs, adding pinches of this and that, materials whose names they knew but whose chemistry remained mysterious. She dreams of apprentices watching masters work, learning through observation and imitation, gradually absorbing knowledge that couldn't be fully verbalized. The master might not know why adding tallow improved the mortar, but he knew it did, had seen it proven over years of experience. In her dreams she stands among them, watching stones being set, and she understands everything, sees the thermal patterns flowing through the walls, comprehends the logic behind every decision. But when she wakes, the understanding fades, leaving only the memory of having understood. The mystery continues, carved into stone, waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. Dr. Hollis sleeps, and the old stones of the church hold their warmth through the night, doing what they've done for 7 centuries, quietly, efficiently, mysteriously defying the cold. In the village, other sleepers rest in their beds unaware of the thermal wonder standing among them. To them, the church is simply there, a fixture of landscape, a place for weddings and funerals and Sunday obligation. They don't think about its stones or their properties. Why would they but? Their grandparents knew and their grandparents. Village memory is long preserved in stories and traditions that persist even when their origins are forgotten. The church will still be here when Dr. Hollis's research is complete, when she's moved on to other projects or retired. It will outlast her as it's outlasted everyone who ever studied it or stripped in it or found refuge from winter cold against its walls. That permanence is part of what draws her in an academic world of shifting funding and temporary appointments. There's something reassuring about studying structures built to endure centuries. In the morning she'll return to her measurements and analyses, her careful scientific method, but for now, in the space between waking and sleep, she allows herself to wonder if perhaps the monks were right. Perhaps there is something blessed about stones that offer warmth in winter's depths. Not supernatural, but sacred in the way all survival is, sacred in the way any technology that keeps humans alive through impossible seasons deserves reverence. The stones are warm, and that's miracle enough. The night deepens, the village sleeps on. The church stands patient, holding its thermal secrets, waiting for dawn when Dr. Hollis will return with her instruments and questions. The stones have waited 7 centuries already. They can wait a few hours more. Tomorrow she'll drill another sample, send it to another laboratory, add another data point to her growing collection. Each sample is a tiny wound in the ancient structure, carefully placed and minimally invasive, but she feels the weight of it nonetheless. She's inflicting small damages in pursuit of understanding, hoping the knowledge gained justifies the intrusion. The church authorities have given permission, trust her expertise, but she still feels like a trespasser, sometimes disturbing something that has earned its peace. Yet she continues, driven by the conviction that understanding matters, that recovering lost knowledge serves a purpose beyond academic curiosity. If medieval builders knew techniques for creating thermally efficient structures using only natural materials, that knowledge could inform modern, sustainable architecture. We face climate challenges that demand reducing energy consumption. Buildings account for nearly 40% of global energy use, much of it for heating and cooling. If we could build structures that naturally moderate temperature, that require less mechanical climate control, the savings would be enormous. Medieval churches might hold lessons for a warming world. That's the grant application argument, the utilitarian justification that sometimes secures funding. But Dr. Hollis's real motivation is simpler. She wants to know, she wants to understand what those masons understood, to recover knowledge that shouldn't be lost, to prove that medieval people weren't primitive but sophisticated empiricists whose observations deserve respect. The mystery calls to her, and she cannot help but answer. Outside her window, the night is perfectly still, no wind moves through the village streets, the stars burn cold and distant, indifferent to human concerns, indifferent to the small drama of one researcher pursuing knowledge in a rural French village. The universe is vast, and the mystery is small, but to Dr. Hollis it matters, and perhaps that's enough. She sleeps and dreams, and in the morning the work continues. The stones remain warm, the mystery endures, patient and silent, waiting for the day when someone finally understands what those anonymous medieval builders knew, what they encoded in mortar and placement, what they preserved without meaning to, in structures built to praise God but which served also and always the very human need for warmth in winter's unforgiving cold. High above the mud-walled villages where peasants huddle in smoky cottages and masons lay patient stones, stands a castle, a massive declaration in gray stone that wealth can defy winter's grip. This is not the architecture of survival, but the architecture of display, where warmth itself becomes a symbol of power. The castle of Château de Montlair rises from a hilltop in Normandy. Its curtain walls thick enough to walk upon its towers, high enough to survey miles of frozen countryside. From these heights, the Lord can see his lands, dormant fields, bare trees and the small, dark shapes of peasant villages clinging to the valley floor like burrs. The stone itself is Norman limestone, quarried 20 miles distant and hauled by ox cart over muddy roads, each block representing days of labor. The outer walls stand 15 feet thick at the base, tapering to 10 feet at the battlements, broad enough that guards can patrol the perimeter without fear of arrows. These walls took 15 years to complete, consuming the labor of hundreds of workers and the wealth of 3 generations. They represent security purchased at enormous cost, a permanent statement that this family intends to endure. The towers, 4 of them, each rising 50 feet above the walls, were added later, after the main keep was finished. They command approaches from every direction, ensuring no enemy can advance unseen. But winter transforms these defensive features into thermal liabilities. Stone absorbs cold like a sponge absorbs water, holding it deep within its mass, radiating it inward through every surface. The thickness that stops arrows does nothing to stop cold. Indeed, the very mass of stone ensures that once winter settles into the walls, no amount of fire can drive it out until spring's sun warms the exterior. Inside the great hall, Sir Glom de Montlair sits near a fireplace large enough to stand inside. The hearth is carved from local granite, decorated with his family's coat of arms, and the fire within roars with a prodigal's abandon. Whole logs, not careful sticks, burning without concern for conservation. The fireplace opening measures 8 feet wide and 6 feet high, a cavity that could shelter a peasant family. Its depth extends 4 foot back into the wall lined with fire brick that glows orange in the heat. The iron supporting the logs are brought iron, each one shaped like a coiled serpent, their eyes made from polished brass that reflects fire light. These and irons alone cost more than a peasant earns in 5 years. The heat from this fire is magnificent and wasteful. It radiates across the hall in waves, warming perhaps 10 feet of space effectively, while the rest of the vast room remains cold enough to see breath. Most of the heat rises straight up into the vast volume above, disappearing into the darkness near the ceiling, where it serves no purpose. A peasant seeing this waste would weep at the inefficiency. But efficiency isn't the goal. The goal is demonstration, proof that this household commands so many resources that waste itself becomes a form of communication, but that 10 feet of warmth is where power sits. The Lord's chair is positioned precisely in the heat's embrace, and arranged around him in descending arcs of proximity are his family, his steward, his marshal, his chaplain. Each person's place determined by their importance, measured in distance from flame. The chair itself is carved oak, its back rising 5 feet high, decorated with linen fold paneling and topped with the family crest. Cushions stuffed with goose down and covered in Flemish velvet provide the only softness in this stone world. Sogely's eldest son sits to his right, close enough to share the warmth, positioned as heir, apparent not just in succession but in space. His younger son sits farther out, in a zone where warmth is theoretical, a fact that both boys understand without discussion. The steward, Pierre, stands near enough to consult, but far enough to acknowledge rank. He holds a ledger, bound in leather, tracking expenses and revenues with meticulous detail. The marshal responsible for military matters stands at the edge of the warm zone, his position reflecting that violence is necessary but shouldn't intrude on domestic comfort. He wears a sword even indoors, a reminder of his function. The chaplain, Father Benedict, sits on a stool, positioned in the warmth, his status as spiritual advisor granting him proximity despite his lack of secular rank. His robes are wool, dyed, black, simple compared to the noble finery around him. Yet his position speaks of influence that transcends fabric. The great hall itself is a testament to architectural ambition. The ceiling soars 30 feet above the floor, held up by wooden beams as thick as trees, which they recently were. Each beam is oak, hunted from the forest and left rough, showing axe marks and the natural curve of growth. They span 40 feet without support, a feat of engineering that required selecting trees of enormous size. The beams rest on corals carved into the stone walls, decorative supports shaped like angels, demons, and mythical beasts. Each coral is unique, carved by masons who signed their work in stone. The ceiling between the beams is planked with oak boards, creating a wooden sky above the hall. These boards help contain heat, preventing it from rising into the roof spaces above, though their effectiveness is marginal at best. Above the plank ceiling lies the roof structure, a forest of rafters supporting slate tiles that shed rain and snow. This space is cold as the outdoors, filled with drafts and inhabited by pigeons whose coupling provides constant background noise. Tapestries hang along the stone walls, not for decoration alone, but as insulation, creating air pockets between fabric and stone that slightly reduce the chill bleeding through. The tapestries depict hunting scenes, battles, mythological creatures, stories woven in thread that cost more than a peasant earns in a lifetime. One tapestry shows a boar hunt, the beast surrounded by hounds, while nobles on horseback close in with spears. The detail is extraordinary. Individual leaves on trees, expressions on faces, even the texture of the boar's bristled hide. Another depicts the wedding of Plus and Thetis, gods and mortals mingling at a feast table laden with impossibly perfect food. The weaver spent 3 years creating this single panel, working from drawings provided by a monk who had studied classical texts. A third tapestry portrays a unicorn captured in a garden kneeling before a virgin, its horn lowered in submission. The symbolism is Christian and courtly, celebrating purity and chivalric love in equal measure. These tapestries serve practical purposes beyond beauty. The air gap they create between fabric and stone breaks the direct thermal connection, marginally reducing heat loss. They also reduce sound reflection, making the hall less ecotone, allowing conversation without constant reverberations. A stone room without fabric becomes an acoustic nightmare where every sound multiplies, but mostly they display wealth. Each tapestry represents years of skilled labor, expensive dyed wool and artistic vision, all devoted to making stone walls slightly less inhospitable. The floor is laid with slate tiles, cold underfoot despite the fire. Rushes are scattered across these tiles, dried grass mixed with herbs, changed monthly, meant to provide some insulation and mask the smell of dogs, spilled food and human traffic. The rushes come from wetlands near the river, harvested in late summer. When they're dry and brittle, servants gather them by the cart load, spreading them thick across the stone. Herbs are mixed into the rushes: lavender, rosemary, mint, sage, chosen for scent and supposed medicinal properties. The belief persists that these herbs purify air, prevent disease, ward off evil influences. In reality, they simply provide pleasant fragrance to disguise less pleasant smells. Dogs urinate on the rushes, food falls and rots between the stalks. Dirt tracked in on boots accumulates in layers. Every month, servants rake out the old rushes and spread fresh ones, carrying the soiled material to dung heaps outside the walls. It's dirty work assigned to the lowest servants, those with no skills valuable enough to excuse them from unpleasant tasks. The fresh rushes provide marginal insulation, a thin barrier between feet and frozen stone. Walking on them creates a soft crunching sound, and they compress under traffic into packed paths, showing the hall's circulation patterns. Windows puncture the walls at intervals, each one an architectural compromise. The actual glass, colored and leaded, is a declaration of wealth. But even leaded glass admits cold in winter. The windows rise 8 foot tall and span 4 feet wide, divided by stone mullions into smaller sections. Each section contains diamond-shaped panes held together by lead canes, creating a web of metal and glass. The glass itself is colored, not painted, but tinted during manufacture by adding metallic oxides to the molten material: red from copper, blue from cobalt, green from iron, yellow from silver compounds. These colors are inconsistent, varying within single panes, creating mottled effects that shift as light angles change through the day. Medieval glassmakers couldn't control color precisely, so variation became an accepted characteristic, even a virtue. The strips of lead holding glass pieces together, provide structural strength but also creates visual patterns. Geometric designs emerge from functional necessity, beauty arising from engineering constraints. Wooden shutters can be closed against the worst weather, sealing out light and wind together, transforming the hall into a cave, lit only by fire and candles. But on days when storms haven't forced the shutters closed, the colored glass creates pools of tinted light on the floor. Red, blue, gold beauty extracted from discomfort's necessity. The shutters are oak planks, 2 in thick, bound with iron straps and hung on massive hinges. Closing them requires servants working in pairs, lifting and swinging the heavy panels into place, securing them with iron bars. With shutters closed, the hall becomes a different place, darker, slightly warmer, more enclosed. The psychological effect matches the thermal one, creating a sense of shelter that open windows undermine. But most days, weather permitting, the shutters stay open. The light, they admit, is valuable, despite the cold it brings, allowing activities that would be impossible in darkness. Embroidery requires light, accounting requires light. Simply moving through the hall safely requires enough visibility to avoid obstacles and other people. So the windows stay open, cold streams in and the household accepts this bargain: vision for warmth, awareness for comfort, reasonable trades in a world where both are scarce. Sailor wears multiple layers of wool and fur despite sitting beside the fire, a long tunic lined with marten fur, an outer robe of heavy wool dyed deep burgundy, soft leather boots lined with rabbit fur. The tunic extends to his knees, its weight significant from the fur lining. Marten is expensive, small animals requiring many pelts to line a single garment chosen for softness and status rather than thermal efficiency. His outer robe is secured with a belt of pulled leather. Its buckle silver, decorated with enamel work. The belt serves a practical purpose, gathering fabric close to the body, reducing drafts, but it's also ornamental. Another small display. The wool itself is English, traded through merchants in Bruce fold and dyed by specialists whose techniques remain jealously guarded secrets. The deep burgundy color comes from madder root and costs significantly more than natural gray or brown wool. His boots are crafted by a cobbler who serves the family exclusively, measuring feet precisely and constructing footwear that combines flexibility with warmth. The rabbit fur lining extends to midkf, where the boots end and wool hose begin. Under everything he wears a linen shirt changed daily, a luxury peasants cannot imagine. Clean linen against skin is considered essential for health, absorbing sweat and oils that might otherwise cause skin problems. Even wealth cannot fully defeat winter within these walls. The stone that makes the castle defensible makes it nearly impossible to heat, and the very scale that demonstrates power ensures that warmth can never fill the space. The fundamental problem is volume. The Great Hall contains roughly 35,000 cub-feet of air, all of which must be heated to achieve comfort. A single fire, no matter how large, cannot generate enough heat to warm this volume effectively. The heat rises, creating a layer of warm air near the ceiling while leaving the occupied zone cold. Even multiple fires would struggle. The hall has 2 additional fireplaces, smaller ones built into side walls, but lighting them creates competing convection currents that disrupt rather than enhance heating. The solution would be smaller rooms, lower ceilings, better insulation, all the features that make peasant cottages more thermally efficient. But these features would undermine the hall's purpose. A great hall must be great. Its size demonstrates the lord's ability to command space, to build larger than necessary, to devote resources to impression rather than mere function. But Sir Gum isn't seeking comfort in the peasant sense, the desperate warmth of survival. He's displaying his ability to command warmth, to burn wood so prodigiously that peasants watching smoke rise from his chimneys know he has fuel to spare. The chimneys themselves are visible for miles, for massive stone stacks rising above the roofline, constantly streaming smoke. In winter this visibility is intentional. Peasants in the valley looking up at night see sparks rising from the castle's fires. They understand what this means, that's somewhere above them. People are burning wood by the cord, fuel that could keep a peasant family warm all winter, consumed in a single evening. This display breeds both resentment and acceptance. Resentment that resources are distributed so unevenly. Acceptance that this is how the world works, has always worked, will always work. The smoke itself carries meaning. Thick white smoke indicates well-seasoned wood burning efficiently, evidence of planning and wealth. Thin smoke or excessive sparks would indicate green wood or poor quality fuel, signs of poverty or mismanagement. A castle that burns improper fuel signals weakness to anyone who knows how to read the signs. So the fires burn bright and hot, consuming seasoned oak, at a rate that makes practical sense only as performance. The warmth is real, but secondary to the message. His servants, a dozen men and women in wool livery, move through the hall on various errands. They stay near the fire when they can, but their duties draw them into cold corners, up frigid staircases, through drafty corridors. The livery identifies them as belonging to this household, tunics dyed in the lord's colors, bearing his badge embroidered on the chest. The fabric is good wool, better than most servants elsewhere might wear, but far inferior to what the family wears. A serving woman carries linens from storage, her arms wrapped around the bundle for warmth as much as to hold it. She walks quickly through the cold zones, minimizing exposure. A page, a boy of perhaps 12, son of a miner, noble family sent here to learn, runs errands between the hall and other parts of the castle. He wears insufficient clothing for the cold, but complaining would mark him as weak. 2 men are carrying a heavy chest from the storage tower, struggling with its weight across the courtyard. Snow has begun falling again, dusting their shoulders as they work in the kitchen building connected by a covered walkway. Cooks and their assistants work in a different kind of environment. The kitchen is warm from cooking fires, hot even, but the work is harder and the status lower. A serving boy tends the fire, constantly adding logs, adjusting the arrangement for maximum heat. This is his only job from October through March, to keep the Lord's fire burning perfectly, to demonstrate through flame that this household commands resources beyond counting. His name is Thomas, though few in the household bother to learn it. He's the youngest son of a freeman family, sent to serve in the castle at age 10 in hopes he might learn skills or make connections. Instead, he's learned to judge wood by sight, to know which logs will burn hot, which will smoke, which will last longest. He's developed calluses on his hands from handling rough bark and an instinct for fire behavior. He keeps a pile of prepared logs within arm's reach, arranged by size so he can select the right piece without leaving his post. Leaving the fire unattended, even briefly, means returning to diminished flame and an unhappy master. His eyes water constantly from smoke exposure and his face is permanently flushed on one side from heat. He'll carry these marks for life, visible signs of years spent too close to flames. But he's warm, which counts for something, and he eats regularly scraps from the Lord's table, better food than his family sees. So the trade seems acceptable to everyone, except possibly Thomas himself. The wood being burned is oak, seasoned for 3 years in covered sheds. Poor planning means burning green wood which smokes and sputters. Poverty means burning any wood at all, regardless of quality. The woodsheds stand behind the castle, massive structures with slate roofs and open sides to allow air circulation. Inside, logs are stacked in organized rows arranged by when they were cut. The system requires planning years in advance. Trees cut this winter won't burn well until 3 winters hence, so the household must always maintain a 3-year reserve. This reserve represents wealth stored in a form peasants cannot access. The trees grow on land the Lord owns, cut by foresters in his employ, stored in buildings he constructed. The labor of maintaining this system, cutting, splitting, stacking, rotating stock, occupies several men year-round, their specialized workers valued for their knowledge of wood and their reliability. Poor wood can ruin a fire, create smoke that drives people from rooms, or fail to provide enough heat during cold snaps. The forester's expertise prevents these failures, but some foresters have been cutting and storing oak for decades, creating a reserve that could fuel fires through multiple winters. This reserve is wealth stored as cord upon cord of dried timber, an insurance policy against cold. The current reserve totals approximately 200 cords, enough wood to fuel the castle's fires for 5 winters if used carefully. 3 winters if used prodigiously. The household uses it prodigiously. Each cord represents 8 ftx. 4t of stacked wood, 128 cub-feet of fuel. 200 cords means 25,600 cub-feet of wood stacked in the sheds. Peasants, if they could see this reserve, would struggle to comprehend the quantity. A peasant family burns perhaps 2 cords per winter. Scored from dead wood and carefully conserved, the castle burns what 50 families need, not because the building requires it for basic heating, but because display requires it. Excess is the point. If war came, if the castle fell under siege, this wood reserve would matter as much as food stores. Maintaining morale during a siege requires keeping fires burning, keeping defenders warm enough to function. So the wood sits in its sheds, dry and ready, waiting to be burned for warmth or for war. Either way, it represents power made tangible in split logs and covered storage. In the corner of the hall, musicians play a lute, a viol, a small pipe. Their music is gentle, courtly, meant to create atmosphere rather than demand attention. The lute player is a permanent member of the household, a skilled musician who also serves as a tutor for the Lord's children. His instrument is Italian, costly, strung with gut strings that require frequent replacement. The VLE player is visiting a traveling musician who stopped at the castle seeking shelter and was invited to stay through winter. His instrument is older, its body scarred from travel, but his playing is refined. The pipe player is younger, an apprentice learning his craft. His instrument is simpler, but his enthusiasm compensates for his limited technique. Together they create music that fills the hall without dominating it. Background sound that suggests refinement and leisure. The ability to maintain musicians suggests wealth beyond mere survival needs. The musician's fingers are cold despite the fire's proximity, and occasionally they pause to warm their hands over blazers positioned near their seats. Even entertainment must acknowledge winter's presence. The blazers are small metal baskets on legs filled with charcoal that burns with intense heat but little flame. Charcoal is expensive wood burned in controlled conditions to drive off moisture and volatile compounds, leaving pure carbon. The blazers provide localized heat without smoke, making them ideal for situations where flame would be dangerous or distracting. But their fuel cost means they're used sparingly. The musicians share 2 blazers among 3 players, negotiating access without disrupting their performance. Cold fingers produce poor music, so the pauses are necessary, even if they break continuity. The audience, if they can be called that, pays little attention to the music itself. It's environmental, like the tapestries or the candlelight, contributing to an atmosphere of civilized comfort. But the musicians know their value. Houses without music feel empty. Military, purely functional music suggests that life here is about more than defense and display. It's about culture, refinement, the higher pursuits that separate nobles from barbarians. Sir Gum's wife, Lady Isabel, sits in her own chair near the fire, working on embroidery with fingers that move slowly in the cold. The thread is silk, impossibly expensive, imported from distant lands, and she's creating a design of lies and vines that will eventually become an altar cloth. Her chair matches her husband's in quality but not in size, smaller, more delicate but still carved oak with velvet cushions. Her position is beside him but slightly back, a spatial arrangement that reflects both partnership and hierarchy. The embroidery frame holds linen stretched taut, providing a surface for her needle. The design is drawn on the fabric in light charcoal guidelines that will be covered by stitching. The silk thread comes from Byzantium, traded through Venetian merchants at prices that reflect its journey. Its colors are vivid, reds, blues, greens that natural European dyes cannot match. She works slowly, partly from the cold's effect on her joints, partly from the care required. Each stitch must be precise, maintaining even tension, following the pattern exactly. This work will take months to complete. When finished, it will be donated to the castle chapel, a gift that demonstrates both piety and wealth, the ability to dedicate expensive materials and countless hours to something that will be given away. She wears a heavy wool gown lined with squirrel fur, a wimple that covers her hair and neck, and still she shivers occasionally. The fire warms her face and chest, but her back remains cold, her feet frozen, despite the thick layer of rushes. The gown is blue, a color achieved with wed, less expensive than imported dyes, but still a significant expense. Multiple layers of fabric create thermal mass, trapping body heat. The squirrel fur lining is gray, made from winter pelts, when the fur is thickest. Hundreds of small pelts were stitched together to line this single gown, a labor-intensive process requiring skilled furriers. Her wimple is linen, bleached white through repeated washing and sun exposure. It covers her hair completely, a sign of married status and modesty, but it also helps retain heat around her head and neck. Yet despite all these layers, despite the fur and wool and linen, she's cold. The fire heats one side of her body, while the other remains exposed to the hall's chill. She shifts position periodically, rotating to warm different sides, a small dance of thermal management that has become unconscious habit. Everyone near the fire performs this rotation, adjusting their relationship to heat constantly. This is the paradox of castle life in winter, surrounded by stone walls meant to protect, wrapped in expensive furs, tended by servants, yet never truly warm. The architecture that ensures security ensures discomfort. Stone walls 3 feet thick provide protection against everything except cold. In fact, they amplify cold, their thermal mass, absorbing winter's chill and releasing it inward. Wood walls, like those in peasant cottages, conduct heat poorly. They can be built thin yet still insulate, effectively creating a barrier between inside and outside. But wood burns. Wood can be breached with axes or fire. Wood is temporary, requiring constant maintenance and eventual replacement. Stone endures. Stone resists fire, withstands siege engines, outlasts generations. Stone is permanent, marking territory with structures that announce long-term occupation. The choice between wood and stone is never purely practical. It's social, political, military, a statement about who you are and what you intend. Castle design represents different priorities than peasant cottages or monastery chapels, where peasants build for thermal efficiency and monks build for communal warmth. Nobles build for defense and display. Peasant cottages are small, low-ceiling, with minimal windows. They're built partially underground, when possible, using earth as insulation. Their fires are open hearths in the center of the single room, smoke rising to the thatched roof where it exits through gaps between stalks. Smoky, yes, but surprisingly warm. The entire small volume heated by a modest fire. Monasteries build differently again. Their chapels are stone for permanence, but designed with communal warmth in mind. Multiple bodies in one space, sharing heat, accepting cold as a form of spiritual discipline. Nobles reject both models. Their architecture must impress, must dominate the landscape, must demonstrate power through scale and permanence. Thermal comfort is sacrificed to these priorities. The choice is conscious, if not explicitly articulated. Better to be cold in an impressive space than warm in a humble one. The thick walls that stop arrows also stop heat from penetrating. The high ceilings that create impressive spaces create volumes of cold air that no fire can fill. Military architecture and thermal architecture work against each other. Features that make spaces defensible make them uncomfortable. Thick walls have enormous thermal mass. They absorb heat slowly and release it slowly, creating a time lag between exterior and interior temperatures. In summer this lag keeps interiors cool. In winter, it keeps them cold long after spring arrives. High ceilings create impressive volumes but ensure that heat rises away from the occupied zone. The grandeur comes at a thermal cost that no amount of fuel can overcome. The numerous rooms, private chambers for the lord and lady, separate halls for different functions, towers and passages and stairs fragment the building into thermal zones that can never be unified. Heat becomes localized, concentrated around individual fires, leaving corridors and stairwells as cold as outdoor air. The castle contains perhaps 40 separate rooms, each with its own thermal characteristics. Some have fireplaces, most don't. Corridors connecting rooms become wind tunnels, drafts accelerating through narrow spaces. Moving between rooms means passing through zones of intense cold. Stairwells, spiral stairs inside towers, straight stairs between levels are particularly frigid. Stone steps radiate cold and the vertical shafts create convection currents that pull warm air upward and push cold air down. Servants making multiple trips between levels experience repeated thermal shocks, warm near fires, freezing in passages, warm again in destination rooms. Their bodies never equilibrate, always adjusting. This fragmentation is intentional, a feature rather than a flaw. Private chambers provide privacy, separate spaces allow simultaneous activities, and the complexity itself demonstrates wealth, the ability to build more than necessary. So Gum rises from his chair and immediately the cold finds him beyond the fire's immediate radius. The hall is no warmer than a barn. The transition is sharp, from warmth that feels comfortable to cold that penetrates through all his layers within seconds. It's like stepping from a building into a winter storm. He walks to the high table where evening meal is being prepared. The table is laid with linen cloths, another display of wealth, as linen must be imported and laundered, a process requiring servants and resources, and set with Peter. Plates, silver cups and ceremonial salt cellars. The high table stands on a was, raised a foot above the main floor, a physical elevation that reinforces social elevation. Only the Lord's immediate family and honored guests sit here. The linen cloths are white, maintained through extensive laundering involving lye soap and sun bleaching. Keeping them white requires dedicated labor, making their presence on the table a statement about available servants. The Peter plates are English-made, cast in molds and finished by hand. Peter is an alloy of tin and copper, softer than silver but more durable than clay, representing a middle tier of luxury. The silver cups are heirlooms passed down through 3 generations. Each is different, some plain, some decorated with engraving, all bearing the family crest somewhere on their surface. The salt cellars are particularly important, elaborate silver containers that hold salt, one of medieval cuisine's most valuable commodities. The positioning of salt cellars marks social divisions. Those seated above the salt are important, those below the salt are not. The meal, when it arrives, will be elaborate by medieval standards: roasted meats, venison from his forests, pork from his pens, doves from his coat, accompanied by white bread, spiced wine, sugared fruits preserved from autumn. The venison is from a stag killed 2 days ago during a hunt. The meat has been aging in a cold room, developing flavor, now ready for roasting. The pork comes from the castle's pens, where pigs are kept year-round and slaughtered as needed. Winter slaughter is common. The cold helps preserve meat and winter. Fattened pigs provide more fat. The doves are from the castle's dove cote, a tower structure housing hundreds of birds. Dove cotes are a noble privilege, like hunting rights. Peasants cannot maintain them. White bread is made from bolted flour sieved to remove bran and produce fine white powder. This process removes nutrition but creates a product that signals status. Dark bread is for peasants, white bread for nobles. The spiced wine is heated in the kitchen with cinnamon cloves and honey, a drink called hypocrite, served warm to combat cold. The spices come from Asia, traded across continents at enormous markup, but the food will cool quickly in the hall's chill air. The servants will need to make multiple trips from the kitchen, a separate building connected to the hall by a covered walkway positioned apart to prevent kitchen fires from spreading to the main castle. Kitchen fires are common and dangerous. Cooking requires constant flame. Fat splatters ignite chimney, creosote catches fire. Disaster is always one accident away. Building the kitchen separate protects the main castle. If the kitchen burns, it can be rebuilt without compromising the fortified core. But this safety measure creates a service problem. Cooked food must travel 50 yards from kitchen to hall, exposed to cold during the journey. The covered walkway helps, but it's still outdoors, drafty, cold, often wet or snow-covered. Servants walk quickly carrying heavy platters, trying to deliver food before it cools completely. Each trip loses heat. The roasted meat that left the kitchen sizzling arrives at the table merely warm and grows cold on the plate while diners work through multiple courses. Winter makes even feasting slightly sad, slightly desperate. Medieval dining involves multiple courses served in sequence, each course containing several dishes presented simultaneously, creating a display of abundance. But in winter this abundance turns lukewarm before it can be consumed. Diners learn to eat quickly, taking advantage of whatever heat remains. Pausing to talk or drink means returning to a cold plate. Cold food, cold satisfaction. Sauces help. Hot, spiced sauces can be poured over cooling meat, temporarily raising temperatures and adding flavor that masks coldness. The kitchen sends sauces in insulated containers, trying to preserve heat. But ultimately, winter dining in castles means accepting that food will be colder than ideal. It's another compromise, another way that architecture undermines comfort, despite wealth's best efforts. Sir Dylan returns to his seat, thinking about the peasants in the valley below. He's aware in an abstract way of their suffering. He's ridden through villages in winter, seen the thin faces, the huddled forms. His position requires occasional visits to villages to collect rents, observe conditions, show himself to the people who work his land. These visits happen even in winter, though he makes them brief. He's seen cottages with walls so thin that wind penetrates directly through gaps in wee and dorm construction. He's seen children with inadequate clothing, blue with cold. Furthermore, he's seen families living in single rooms with their animals sharing body heat with livestock. Furthermore, he's smelled the smoke, the unwashed bodies, the animal waste, but he doesn't connect their cold to his warmth, doesn't understand that the wood burning so prodigy. In his hearth represents trees that once sheltered peasant huts from wind deadwood that peasants might have used to warm their cottages. The connection exists but remains invisible. The forest is his property, granted by the king generations ago, maintained through military service and political loyalty. Peasants who live near the forest have no legal right to its resources. Dead wood on the ground belongs to the Lord as surely as living trees do. Taking wood without permission is theft, punishable by fines or worse. The laws are clear, enforced by the Lord's men, backed by violence if necessary. The forest is his by law and tradition, and peasants found taking wood without permission face punishment fines they can't pay, leading to debts that bind them more tightly to the land. The architecture of power includes who gets to be warm. The fines are carefully calculated to be unpayable. A peasant caught taking wood owes more than a year's surplus income, ensuring debt that can never be cleared. This debt becomes heritable, passed to children, tying families to the land across generations. Serfs are created through accumulated debt as much as through birth status. The system is self-reinforcing. Poverty creates the need to take wood. Taking wood creates debt. Debt creates binding obligation. Obligation creates poverty. And all of it is legal, proper, the way things are supposed to work. The Lord provides protection and justice, peasants provide labor and obedience, and the distribution of resources reflects this arrangement. Sugar doesn't think of himself as cruel. He's simply maintaining order, enforcing rights, doing what his position requires. As evening deepens, servants light candles throughout the hall. The candles are beeswax, expensive, clean, burning, not the tallow candles that smoke and stink in peasant cottages. Beeswax candles are made from wax produced by honeybees, a valuable commodity that requires maintaining hives and harvesting combs. The castle keeps several hives specifically for wax production. Tallow candles, by contrast, are made from rendered animal fat, sheep fat, beef fat, whatever is available. They burn with thick smoke and an unpleasant smell. The difference in light quality is substantial. Beeswax burns with a steady, bright flame and pleasant honey scent. Tallow flickers, smokes, and stinks. Using beeswax rather than tallow is another small demonstration of wealth. The castle burns in an evening what a peasant family couldn't afford in a year. The candles are held in iron candelabras, positioned on tables and mounted on walls. The candelabras are simple but functional, designed to catch dripping wax and allow candle replacement. The candlelight is warm and golden, creating illusions of coziness that the temperature doesn't support. In the flickering light the great hall looks almost comfortable, almost warm enough. Light has psychological effects beyond its practical purpose of allowing vision. Warm candlelight suggests warmth itself, creating a feeling of comfort even when the actual temperature contradicts this. The flickering of flames, both candles and fireplace, creates movement in the space, making it feel alive and inhabited. Static, cold darkness would be psychologically unbearable. The light helps maintain morale, even if it doesn't maintain warmth. Shadows dance on the tapestries, making the woven figures seem to move. The illusion adds life to the hall, disguising the cold reality behind visual warmth. So Gum has a private chamber beyond the hall, a room reserved for himself and his wife. It's smaller than the hall, easier to heat and equipped with a luxury. Peasants cannot imagine a fireplace with an actual chimney. The chamber measures 20 foot square, substantial but manageable, a volume that can be heated effectively. Its ceiling is lower too, only 12 feet high, reducing the air volume that needs warming. The chimney is a relatively recent innovation, expensive to build, requiring skilled masons to construct the flue correctly so it draws smoke out without letting too much heat. Escape. Sufism's father added it 20 years ago, and it transformed winter life for the castle's elite. Building a chimney requires understanding airflow principles. The flue must be tall enough to create draft, wide enough to allow smoke passage, but not so wide that heat escapes too readily. The interior of the flue is lined with fire brick protecting the stone structure from heat damage. The mason who built it spent a month on this single project, carefully constructing each element. The chimney exits through the castle's roof, its stack rising another 10 feet above the roofline to ensure proper draft. Wind patterns around towers can create downdrafts that push smoke back into rooms. The extra height helps prevent this. With a chimney, the room can have fire without smoke, warmth without the constant irritation of stinging eyes and aching lungs. It's a subtle improvement, but it changes everything, allows real comfort, allows reading by firelight, allows sleep in a room warmed throughout the night before the chimney. Fires in enclosed rooms filled those rooms with smoke, windows had to be opened for ventilation, defeating the purpose of heating. People lived with chronic eye irritation, coughs and respiratory problems from smoke exposure. The smell of smoke permeated clothing, hair, everything. The chimney solves this problem elegantly, providing heat while removing its unwanted byproduct. The innovation seems obvious in retrospect, but it required centuries to develop and spread. Not all castles have chimneys yet. Many still rely on central hearths with smoke holes in ceilings or open fires in rooms with windows opened for ventilation. Sir Gilham's castle is relatively modern in this respect, reflecting wealth invested in comfort improvements rather than purely defensive features. His father recognized that livability matters, that a castle must be inhabited year-round to serve its purpose. But only one room has this luxury. The rest of the castle makes do with open fires, blazers, or simple cold. The cost of building multiple chimneys would be enormous, each one requiring skilled mason work, stone and structural modifications to existing walls. The castle could afford it, but tradition and priority dictate otherwise. The Great Hall needs to be great, which means open and impressive, which makes a chimney installation difficult. The private chamber, by contrast, is small enough to retrofit. Other rooms, guest chambers, servants' quarters, storage rooms don't justify the expense. Guests can endure cold temporarily, servants are expected to endure it permanently, and stored goods benefit from cold temperatures. So the hierarchy of comfort matches the social hierarchy. The lord and lady have a chimney. Everyone else has varying degrees of cold. Lady Isabel retires to this chamber after evening prayers, accompanied by her ladies-in-waiting. They help her undress, removing layer after layer of wool and fur until she stands in a linen shift. Evening prayers are held in the castle's chapel, a small stone room on the floor above the Great Hall. The chaplain conducts vespers, leading the household through psalms and prayers that mark the day's end. The chapel is unheated, except by body heat from the assembled household. Everyone stands close together, sharing warmth, their breath visible in the cold air. The ritual takes perhaps half an hour, long enough to fulfill religious obligations, short enough that no one freezes. When it ends, everyone disperses quickly, seeking whatever warmth their station affords. Lady Isabel walks through cold corridors to reach her chamber, moving quickly. Her ladies-in-waiting following. The corridors are darker, now, lit only by candles in sconces spaced far apart. Then they help her into a nightgown of heavy flannel, wrap her in a fur-lined robe and guide her to the bed. The bed is itself a small fortress against cold, a massive wooden frame hung with heavy curtains that can be drawn closed, creating a fabric room within the stone room. The bed frame is oak, its posts carved with spiral patterns and topped with finials shaped like pine cones. The craftsmanship is excellent, joints, tight, wood, polished, smooth. The curtains are wool, lined with linen, hung from iron rods fixed to the canopy frame. They can be drawn open during the day and closed at night, transforming the bed into an enclosed space. The curtains are heavy enough to trap air, creating an insulating barrier between the bed's interior and the room's cold. This simple technology is remarkably effective. Medieval beds are designed around this curtaining system. The bed itself is a room within a room, a micro-environment that can be controlled independently. Inside, body heat accumulates. Two people sleeping in a curtained bed can raise the interior temperature by 10 degrees through body heat alone. Inside the curtained bed, warmed by heated stones wrapped in cloth and placed beneath the covers, Lady Isabel can finally achieve something approaching comfort. The bed curtains trap body heat, create a pocket of warmth separate from the room's cold. The heated stones are prepared by servants who place them in the fireplace until they're hot, then wrap them in wool cloth to prevent burning. They're positioned at the foot of the bed and along the sides, radiating warmth into the enclosed space. The stones hold heat for hours, gradually cooling through the night, but providing initial warmth that makes sleep possible. By morning, they'll be cold, but by then body heat has warmed the space. The mattress is stuffed with wool, providing insulation from below. Beneath the mattress lies a rope, latten, stretched across the bed frame, supporting the weight with some give. Sheets are linen, washed regularly. Another luxury. Blankets are wool, several of them layered according to need. On top, a coverlet stuffed with down provides final insulation. The pillow is stuffed with goose down, soft and warm. Lady Isabel's head sinks into it, her face, the only part of her body exposed to the air. So Gum joins her. Later, after seeing to castle business, checking that guards are posted, that doors are barred, that the night will pass without incident, he too retreats behind the bed. Curtains into the small warm cave where sleep is possible. His final rounds take him through the castle, down to the main gate where guards stand watch, up to the towers where sentries pace. He speaks briefly with the captain of the guard, confirming that everything is secure. The captain reports no unusual activity, no signs of trouble. Sir Gum checks the barring of the main gate personally. A thick oak beam that fits into iron brackets securing the gate against forcing. With the beam in place, the gate cannot be opened from outside. He inspects the courtyard empty now, except for falling snow. Footprints crisscross the packed earth, but no one moves in the darkness. Satisfied that the castle is secure, he returns to the warmth of his chamber. The contrast between the cold castle and the warmed room is dramatic, like stepping between different seasons. Outside the curtains, the chamber fire burns low. A servant will enter before dawn to rebuild it, creeping into the cold room, shivering as he works to coax flame from embers. The servant assigned to this task is an older man trusted not to disturb the lord and lady as he works. He sleeps near the kitchen where some residual heat persists through the night. He wakes while it's still dark, dresses quickly and makes his way through the castle carrying kindling and a lantern. The corridors are black and freezing, his lantern casting a small pool of light. He enters the chamber quietly, kneeling before the fireplace to examine the embers. If they've died completely, he'll need to fetch live coals from the kitchen, a failure that could cost him his position, but usually enough embers persist. He arranges kindling carefully over the glowing remnants, blowing gently to encourage flame, gradually building heat until he can add larger pieces of wood. The process takes perhaps 20 minutes. By the time he's finished, the room is beginning to warm and dawn is starting to lighten the windows below in the great hall. Lower-ranking members of the household are bedding down near the fire's remains, servants, guards, various hangers-on. They sleep on benches or on rushes spread on the floor, wrapped in whatever blankets they own, clustered together for warmth. The great hall becomes a dormitory every night, transformed from a public space to a sleeping chamber. Those with nowhere else to go claim spots near where the fire burned. The benches along the walls are claimed by senior servants, those whose status grants them this slight comfort. Junior servants and guards sleep on the rushes wrapped in cloaks or blankets. Some have brought bedding from storage, thin mattresses stuffed with straw, wool blankets, personal possessions. Others make do with their cloaks, using them as both mattress and cover. They arrange themselves in groups sleeping close together to share body heat. Medieval people have fewer privacy expectations. Communal sleeping is normal, even expected in institutional settings. The hall becomes quieter, but never silent. Someone snores, someone coughs, dogs move between sleeping forms. The darkness is not complete. Moonlight through windows, dim glow from banked fire embers. The hall becomes a dormitory, the fire's heat diminishing through the night until by dawn it's barely warmer inside than out, but at least they're sheltered from wind. From snow, from the full assault of winter night. The temperature drops steadily as the fire dies. By midnight the hall is perhaps 5 degrees warmer than outside. Better than nothing, but barely. People wake periodically cold, waking them and huddle deeper into their blankets. Some get up to urinate in the guard robes, latrine chambers built into the walls, then hurry back to their spots. Dawn, when it comes, brings no warmth but at least brings light. People begin to stir, preparing for another day of cold routines and careful management of limited warmth. The first task is rebuilding the fire. Several servants work together, clearing away ash, arranging, kindling, building flame from whatever embers remain. Even lower in the castle's cellars, storage rooms remain cold year-round. Natural refrigeration that preserves food supplies. Barrels of salted meat, wheels of hard cheese, sacks of grain and barrels of wine fill these spaces. The cellars are dug into the hill beneath the castle. Their walls natural rock lined with stone. No windows penetrate here. The darkness is complete without torchlight. The temperature in the cellars stays just above freezing year-round, cold enough to preserve food. Warm enough to prevent ice formation that might damage containers or spoil grain. Salted meat is packed in barrels, layers of salt between layers of pork or beef. The salt draws out moisture, preventing bacterial growth, allowing meat to keep for months. Hard cheese wheels are stacked on shelves, their rind protected by wax coatings. Cheese ages in these cold conditions, developing flavor while remaining edible. Grain is stored in large sacks or in wooden bins, protected from rodents by careful construction and vigilant cats. The castle's cats are working animals valued for pest control. The cold that makes living uncomfortable makes storing food possible. The castle can endure sieges partly because its architecture creates these cold rooms where provisions keep for months. Medieval logistics depend on this storage. Winter means no fresh food, except what can be preserved. The cellar's cold allows accumulation of surplus. A castle under siege might be cut off for months. Adequate food stores mean survival, the difference between holding out and surrendering. So the cold cellars serve dual purposes: peacetime food storage and wartime insurance. Their existence, their capacity, their reliability are matters of life and death. In the towers, guards pace their rounds watching empty frozen fields where enemies are unlikely to approach. In winter they wear every piece of clothing they own, wrapped in cloaks, and still they suffer. Tower duty is miserable in winter. The guard posts are small rooms at the top of each tower, reached by spiral stairs that seem to concentrate cold. Each post has narrow windows on 4 sides, arrow loops designed for defense, perfect for admitting wind. The view extends for miles, but seeing that far provides little comfort when nothing moves in the frozen landscape. Their posts are small rooms, defensible positions with narrow windows overlooking approaches. Blazers burn in these rooms when fuel can be spared, but often the guards simply endure counting hours until relief. Thinking about summer, a brazier of charcoal helps when available, but charcoal is rationed. Guards are given a limited supply per shift, enough to take the edge off the cold, not enough to be truly comfortable. Some guards bring extra clothing, layer upon layer, until they can barely move. Others accept the cold as unavoidable, standing as still as possible to conserve body heat. The hours pass slowly. 4-hour shifts feel eternal in the cold. Guards mark time by the movement of stars, by the distant sound of the castle bell, marking hours when relief arrives, climbing the cold stairs to take over. The watch. The transition is brief, a few words. Exchanged information about anything seen, almost always nothing, and the relieved guard descends gratefully toward whatever warmth the castle offers. Some guards stop in the kitchen on their way to sleep, begging warm drinks, or standing near cooking fires to thaw frozen fingers and faces. The kitchen staff tolerates this. They understand the misery of tower duty. The castle sleeps uneasily cold, seeping through every wall despite their thickness, drafts whistling through arrow slits designed for defense but proving excellent at admitting winter wind. Stone that promises permanence also promises cold, and wealth can only partly mitigate this truth. The night passes in stages, early evenings organized bedding down, midnight's deepest cold when fires are lowest, pre-dawn's miserable, waiting for light and activity to return. Throughout the castle, people sleep or try to sleep, achieving varying degrees of success, the lord and lady in their curtained bed, servants in the great hall, guards in the towers. Each group endures in their own way. The stone walls that protect them also trap cold within their mass. The thickness that stops enemies stops nothing. Thermal cold penetrates as easily as if the walls were thin. Arrow slits, narrow on the outside, widening on the inside to allow archers to aim, create wind tunnels that channel exterior cold directly into interior spaces. Military architecture and comfort. Architecture remain fundamentally opposed. The castle is a machine designed for war that must be inhabited during peace. Its form follows military function and domestic life must adapt to these constraints rather than the reverse. Sir Dillon, warm in his curtained bed, doesn't think about architecture. But if he did, he might recognize that his castle represents a bargain, security for comfort, defensibility for warmth. The thought doesn't occur to him because it doesn't need to. The bargain was made generations ago when his ancestors chose to build in stone, to build high and thick, to prioritize defense above all else. He inherited this structure and its implicit compromises. Changing them would mean rebuilding, an expense and effort that would span decades and consume vast resources. He could be warmer in a smaller space, in a timber hall built tight and low, but he couldn't command from such a space, couldn't demonstrate power, couldn't hold land against rivals who might come spring, challenge his claim. A timber hall might be burned by enemies, destroyed in a single night of violence. Stone persists, survives, outlasts, attacks that would obliterate wooden structures. The castle's very existence teeters, challenges. Enemies, seeing these walls, understand that taking them would require siege engines, extended campaigns, resources that few possesses. So the defensive value justifies the discomfort, or rather, the discomfort is simply irrelevant to the building's purpose. Comfort was never a design criterion, so the castle stays cold and wealth is spent on fuel rather than design improvements. It's cheaper to burn more wood than to rebuild walls, simpler to add more fires than to rethink the architecture. This calculation is purely economic. The stone walls exist, represent sunk costs that cannot be recovered. Modifying them would cost more than their worth in comfort gained. Fuel is expensive, but renewable forests grow more, woodworkers can cut more trees. The expense recurs but remains manageable. Architectural changes would require master masons, years of work, disruption of the household's routines. So the existing pattern continues. Each winter means burning through the wood reserve, each summer means replenishing it, and the cycle repeats indefinitely. This pattern repeats across Europe. Castles and manor houses, magnificent but frigid, their occupants wrapped in furs and pride, unwilling to admit that peasant cottages, for all their squalor, might be more thermally Efficient. Class hierarchy demands that nobles live in stone, regardless of comfort. The admission would undermine the entire social structure. If nobles acknowledged that peasants have solved the heating problem better, it would suggest peasants have something nobles lack, a kind of knowledge or competence that contradicts assumptions about social superiority. So nobles don't make this admission, even to themselves. They endure cold as a form of sacrifice, a price paid for nobility, a burden that comes with power. The narrative becomes that nobles bear discomfort that lesser people couldn't endure, that sitting cold in stone halls requires fortitude, that peasants lack. Suffering is reframed as strength. This narrative satisfies everyone. Nobles feel superior despite being cold. Peasants feel their warmth is offset by their lower status and the system continues without modification. Morning comes, grey and reluctant, Sir Gum rises, emerging from bed curtains into the cold chamber, dressing quickly with servants' help. The servant who rebuilt the fire earlier now helps the lord dress, handing him garments in proper sequence, ensuring everything fits correctly. This is skilled work requiring knowledge of complex clothing. The layers go on in order: linen shirt first, providing a clean layer against skin, then wool hose tied to the shirt with laces, then the tunic, then the outer robe, each layer adding warmth and status. The servant works efficiently, speaking only when necessary. His hands are cold despite the room's fire. He arrived from cold corridors only minutes ago and hasn't fully warmed. Sir Gum's thoughts are already on the day ahead, tasks that need completion, decisions that need making, the ongoing management of lands and people that defines his role. The cold is background discomfort, accepted without much thought. He breaks his fast in the great hall where the fire has been rebuilt to roaring life. The bread is fresh from the bakehouse, the ale warm and spiced, the atmosphere as close to comfortable as the castle ever gets. The bakehouse, like the kitchen, is a separate building, another precaution against fire spreading to the main castle. It operates daily, producing bread for the entire household. The bread arrives still warm from the ovens, wrapped in cloth to retain heat during the short walk from bakehouse to hall. It's white bread, fine-grained, expensive status food. The ale is spiced with cinnamon and cloves, heated with a poker pulled red-hot from the fire. The heat makes the drink more palatable in cold weather and the spices add flavor that disguises ale's sometimes questionable quality. Around the high table the family and senior household members gather for this first meal. It's brief, a quick breaking of the night's fast before the day's work begins. Through the tall windows he can see snow beginning to fall, small flakes drifting down like ash, dusting the battlements, the courtyard, the forest beyond. Another storm coming, another day of being trapped within these walls waiting for winter to release its grip. The snow accumulates on horizontal surfaces, the courtyard cobbles, the tops of walls, the branches of trees visible beyond the castle. Vertical surfaces remain clear, wind preventing accumulation. The battlements become white-capped, making the castle look even more like something from a tale, a fortress in winter, isolated and dramatic against the gray sky. The aesthetic appeal doesn't compensate for the cold. It brings the courtyard, normally a busy space with servants crossing, animals being led, deliveries arriving, empties. As snow falls, people retreat indoors, limiting movement to necessary trips. The forest beyond blurs into gray-white obscurity. As snow thickens, the visibility that normally extends miles shrinks to hundreds of yards, then less. He doesn't resent it. Exactly, this is simply how life is for men of his station, powerful within stone prisons, commanding resources, yet commanded by seasons, warm by the fire and frozen everywhere else. Resentment would imply expecting something different. So Gum expects nothing different because he's known nothing different. Winters are cold, castles are cold. This is simply reality. His father lived this way, his grandfather, all his ancestors, back to the first demon, Clear, who built this castle. The pattern is established, traditional, the way things are done. He doesn't imagine alternatives because alternatives don't exist within his frame of reference. This castle is his inheritance, his legacy, his responsibility. Changing it would be rejecting everything his family built. The surrounding architecture is a monument to ambition and limitation, to human desire to build upward and outward, even when inward and smaller might serve better. But serving better isn't the point. Displaying power is the point. The towers reaching toward gray sky, the thick walls enclosing vast spaces, the elaborate stonework, all of it declares permanence, strength, dominance. Function follows form, or rather form is function. A smaller, warmer building wouldn't command the landscape the way this castle does. It wouldn't be visible for miles, wouldn't intimidate potential challenges, wouldn't anchor territorial control. The castle's visibility is strategic. Peasants, working fields, miles away can see it on the horizon, a constant reminder of who holds power. Travelers passing through the region see it and understand. This land is claimed, controlled, defended. This visibility requires height, mass, scale, all the features that make heating impossible. The choice was made long ago and its consequences are accepted as necessary. And so the castle stands, cold and magnificent, its fires burning bright enough to be seen for miles, its smoke rising thick enough to announce that here at least someone has fuel to spare. Here, wealth means waste and warmth means excess, and comfort is beside the point when display matters more. At night, the fires are visible through windows, glowing rectangles in stone walls announcing habitation and wealth. Peasants see this and understand the message. The smoke streams from chimneys, constantly white against gray sky or dark against night sky. The volume of smoke indicates how much wood is burning and everyone who sees it can estimate the cost. This display serves no practical purpose beyond communication. The fires could burn with less fuel. The household could be moderately comfortable with half the wood consumption. But moderation would send the wrong message. It would suggest scarcity, constraint, weakness, that the household cannot afford. Excess must conserve resources, lives close to its limits. Excess demonstrates the opposite, that resources are so abundant that waste is possible, even desirable. The message is power made visible through consumption. Sir Dillon settles into his chair closest to the fire, warmest of all, and behind him, in descending arcs of cold, sit all the others, family servants, retainers. Each in their place, each with their measure of warmth, each part of the hierarchy that architecture enforces. The spatial arrangement is perfectly calibrated. Inches matter. 6 in closer to the fire means noticeably more warmth, and those inches are allocated by social position. His wife sits beside him, sharing the warmest zone, his heir sits close, his younger children slightly farther. Senior servants stand at the edge of real warmth, junior servants beyond that, in zones where cold dominates. No one questions this arrangement. It seems natural, inevitable, proper. Of course the Lord sits closest to the fire. Of course warmth follows rank. The architecture makes this hierarchy physical. The fire is a scarce resource, its warmth limited, and scarcity creates competition. Social rank determines who wins that competition. If warmth were abundant, if the entire hall could be heated uniformly, the spatial hierarchy would lose meaning. Scarcity makes the arrangement meaningful, makes proximity to fire valuable, makes one's place matter. The fire burns, the snow falls, winter continues, and somewhere below in the valley, peasants wake in their smoky cottages, and somewhere in the monastery, monks kneel in their warm chapel. And each group inhabits their own version of winter, their own compromise between cold and shelter, their own architecture of survival. The peasants endure winter differently. Their cottages small and smoky but efficiently heated. Their lives constrained by poverty but adapted to survival. They suffer more from hunger than from cold. The monks have their own solution, communal spaces where many bodies generate heat, spiritual discipline that reframes discomfort as virtue, and architectural knowledge accumulated over centuries of building. Monasteries. Each group has developed strategies appropriate to their circumstances and constraints. None is perfect. All involve compromise, but each allows humans to persist through winter's assault. The castle, the chapel, the cottage. All different answers to the same question: how do humans endure when the world turns frozen and hostile? Each answer valid, each imperfect, each a testament to the stubbornness of life that refuses to yield, even when yielding would be easier. The question is universal, but the answers are specific, shaped by available resources, social position, accumulated knowledge, and cultural values. What works for peasants doesn't work for nobles, not because it couldn't physically work, but because it wouldn't serve their broader purposes. Architecture embodies these purposes. Buildings are not neutral shelters but expressions of values, priorities, assumptions about how life should be lived and what matters most. The castle prioritizes defense and display over comfort. This priority is rational, given the political and military context, the constant threat of violence, the need to hold territory, the importance of demonstrating power to deter challenges. But it means accepting cold as a permanent condition of winter. The choice has been made, the buildings constructed, and now everyone lives, with the consequences. The stones stand, the fires burn, humans persist, and in the great stone hall, Sir Dillon de Montclair sits in his carved chair, wrapped in fur-lined wool. Warm for the moment by his prodigal fire. Lord of all, he surveys powerful and cold and certain that this is how life must be. The snow continues to fall outside the tall windows covering the land in white silence, and winter, indifferent to human comfort or suffering or architectural ambitions, continues its slow progression toward spring that will not arrive for months yet. And so we arrive at the end of our quiet journey through medieval winter, having walked through cottages where peasants slept beside dying embers, workshops where masons shaped stone with frostbitten hands, churches whose walls still whisper secrets of warmth, and halls where nobles commanded flame itself as symbol of their power. Each space, each structure, each wall raised against the cold tells the same story: human determination to survive, shaped into stone and timber, refined across generations of bitter seasons. Medieval architecture was never about beauty, though beauty sometimes emerged. It was about endurance, about creating thin barriers between human fragility and nature's indifference. Every decision a builder made, the angle of a roof, the thickness of a wall, the placement of a hearth, was a negotiation with winter. Too steep and the roof sheds snow but admits wind. Too shallow and it collapses under weight. Too thick and walls consume resources without added benefit. Too thin and frost penetrates. Architecture was mathematics written in mud and stone, equations solving for survival. The peasant's cottage, the mason's chapel, the lord's castle, each represented different solutions to the same problem. The peasant built small and tight, maximizing heat retention with minimum resources. The mason built thick and precise, using stone's thermal mass to moderate temperature swings. The noble built large and wasteful, using excess fuel to compensate for inefficient design. None were perfect. All were cold by modern standards, bitterly, desperately cold, in ways we can barely imagine from our centrally heated present. But they worked well enough. Families survived in those cottages, monks prayed in those chapels, nobles governed from those drafty halls, and civilization persisted through winter, after winter, after winter. The knowledge they accumulated, where to place a fire, how to mix mortar, which woods burn hottest, how to orient buildings toward reluctant winter sun, this knowledge kept Europe alive through the medieval climate, through the Little Ice Age, through centuries when failure meant death. Much of that knowledge has been lost. Now we've replaced it with central heating, insulation, fossil fuels, technologies that let us ignore the lessons winter once taught. Dr. Hollis. Searching for secrets in church walls is searching for something we've forgotten, not superior technology, but accumulated wisdom, the patient, empirical learning that comes from building and rebuilding. From failing and trying again, from centuries of careful attention to what works. There's humility in those old walls, a recognition that humans don't conquer nature, only negotiate with it. The peasant, burning his carefully hoarded wood, knew he couldn't defeat winter, only defer it another night. The mason building walls that would outlast him knew that stone endures, but humans are temporary, that the best he could offer was shelter for people he'd never meet. The noble in his great hall, for all his fires and furs, still heard wind howling through arrow slits, still felt cold at his back, even as flames warmed his face. Modern comfort has made us forget that humility. We expect warmth without effort, shelter without thought, as if these things are guaranteed rather than achieved. But they were never guaranteed. Every warm room in human history represents someone's labor, someone's knowledge, someone's careful attention to the perpetual problem of keeping humans alive in climates that would prefer we weren't. As you lie in your bed tonight, surrounded by walls that keep you effortlessly warm, think about those medieval winters. Think about the peasant waking to frozen breath inside his home, the mason warming himself by the kiln fire, the noble shivering despite his furs. Think about how far we've come, how much easier survival has become. But think also about what we've lost, that intimate knowledge of cold, that constant awareness of shelter's fragility, that respect for the thin walls between comfort and catastrophe. Perhaps there's value in remembering, not to romanticize hardship. Medieval winters were brutal and no one should wish them back, but to maintain some connection to the struggles that shaped our ancestors, the problems they solved, the structures they built that still stand, those warm church stones. Dr. Hollis studies those walls that refuse to fully give up their secrets, their messages from the past, written in mortar and faith. They say, we survived, we persisted, we built things that lasted even when we ourselves did not. Your cottage or castle or apartment, whatever shelter you inhabit, is part of that same lineage. Someone, somewhere, learned how to make walls stand, how to keep rain out, how to trap heat inside. That knowledge passed from master to apprentice, from generation to generation, accumulating and refining until it became the comfortable home you barely think about. Every building you enter represents centuries of human problem solving, of trial and error, of small improvements compounding across time. So as you drift toward sleep tonight, comfortable and warm, spare a thought for the builders, the ones who mixed mortar with frozen hands, who hauled stones up scaffolding in February wind, who spent their lives raising walls for others to inhabit. They're gone now, anonymous and forgotten, their names unrecorded in any chronicle. But their walls remain still sheltering, still warm, still whispering their quiet message. Across the centuries we endured, we built, we made spaces where life could persist despite everything. That's enough. That's everything. Let your eyes close now, let the warmth of your modern walls embrace you. Let sleep come easy, knowing that between you and the cold outside are layers of knowledge, centuries of refinement, walls raised by countless hands across countless winters. The medieval world is gone, but its lessons remain, built into every wall, encoded in every stone. We are their descendants, inheritors of their knowledge, beneficiaries of their labor. Sleep well, sleep warm. The walls will hold through the night.